Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves waking up to the kind of morning no one hopes for. One of those restless nights where thunder claws the roof, the air tastes like metal, and the birds forget to sing. There's a thick, heavy darkness crowding your little cottage window, and as you pull your blanket closer, you realize it's not just another drizzle tapping at the thatch. The smell is wrong, like mud churned up from somewhere deep, somewhere that should have stayed hidden. Your toes are cold, the floor feels different underfoot, almost like it wants to swallow you whole. You peer outside and the world is quietly unraveling. The stream at the village edge, usually gentle enough to tempt barefoot children, has become a surging brown serpent, greedy and restless, snapping at the banks. You hear shouting from across the green. There's the smith's dog barking like he knows something no one else does. The sheep have pressed themselves against the highest part of the field, looking as stunned as you feel. And here's the thing, you probably won't survive this, not unless you've made peace with mud, misery, and the unexpected ways a perfectly ordinary day can tilt on its axis. No one warns you about mornings like this in the storybooks. They never mention the prickly fear that creeps up your spine when the water laps over your doorstep, or the moment you realize your best hope is to run uphill in your nightshirt. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m., or maybe starting your day in a rainy city? Eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together, here on Timeless Sleep. You trudge toward the door, hands trembling, listening to the new language of the storm. You wonder if anyone else is awake, if by some mercy this is a nightmare that only you will remember. But as you step into the heavy morning air, you know it's real. It's always real when your feet sink ankle deep into water that was not there yesterday. The river has come for your home. The path to the well is a blur, puddles stretching out and stitching themselves together until they're indistinguishable from the sluggish brown current pooling at your door. Somewhere beyond the first row of cottages, you spot a neighbor, old Marta, a woman who usually wakes before the sun to bake her bread, now standing knee-deep in muddy water, clutching her wooden spoon as if it can ward off disaster. The storm has swept away the village's sense of normality, replacing it with a raw, urgent energy. People call out to each other, voices cracking under the weight of fear and disbelief. You hear laughter, a thin, nervous sound from a pair of boys trying to save a flock of geese who are for once more capable swimmers than their owners. The villagers gather what little they can, wrapping bundles of bread and cheese in damp cloth, hoisting sleeping children onto their backs, wading through the rising water with whatever dignity they can muster. Your own hands are full, a battered lantern, a loaf of barley bread, and a memory of quieter nights. The things you reach for in moments of panic say more about you than anything you could ever confess. The sky is bruised and sullen, low clouds sagging with secrets, lightning cracks, and in the stuttering afterglow, you glimpse the edges of your world being rearranged. The barn, usually sturdy and dependable, leans at a perilous angle, its roof shedding straw into the water. The thatch from your own roof is beginning to unravel, leaving patches that leak cold rain into the house's dark corners. There's a rumour that the miller's house, always the first to suffer, has already lost its foundation, and nobody wants to think about the church, its graveyard now little more than a muddy pond, where the stones seem to drift and settle like bones. For a moment you wonder if this is it, the day when the river wins and the village disappears, remembered only in the fragile stories of survivors. You remember tales told by candlelight of floods that washed away entire settlements, leaving nothing but a handful of stones and an old song about what was lost. Historians still argue whether entire medieval towns ever truly vanished without a trace, or if it's just the stories growing larger in the telling. But standing there, water lapping at your ankles, you don't care about debates or legends. All that matters is getting to higher ground. Your neighbour, Godric, shouts across the water, his face pale beneath his thatched hat. He's trying to haul his goats onto a cart, but they keep slipping and scattering, their bleats swallowed by the storm. You wade over to help, nearly losing a boot in the sucking mud. Together you coax the goats up, their sharp hooves knocking against your shins. For a moment you both laugh. What else is there to do? And Godric mutters, "Suppose we'll all be eating fish for breakfast if this keeps up." Above you, the clouds churn. Somewhere upstream, the hills have given up their burden, sending it all hurtling down toward your valley. No one here owns a proper clock, but you can tell by the light, or what's left of it, that the day has barely begun. Time behaves strangely when the world is ending. Moments stretch and contract, full of useless questions. Did you close the barn door? Did you pack enough food? Where's your cat? You hear her yowl from the rafters, and with a soggy sigh, climb up to rescue her, tucking her trembling body inside your cloak. There's a certain dark humour to be found in the situation. Later you'll laugh about the sight of the priest floating past in a washtub, clutching his hat and bellowing prayers as if he can command the storm to retreat. You'll remember how the baker tried to shield his dough from the rain with a tattered sack, and how the village boys attempted to row down the main street on a wooden door, yelling about discovering the new world before breakfast. In moments like these, it's easier to be brave when you can pretend it's all a farce, a silly tale you'll recount around the fire when the water's gone. You follow the crowd uphill, toward the ancient oak tree that stands watch over the village. The higher ground is already crowded, families wrapped in wet blankets, livestock pressed together for warmth, dogs pacing nervously, children clinging to parents with wide, uncertain eyes. Someone has managed to light a small fire, though the smoke coils low and blue, barely able to rise in the thick, damp air. The adults talk in low voices, trying to make sense of what's happened. Some say it's punishment, a sign that the village has strayed from the right path. Others whisper about strange omens, a flock of crows that gathered on the church roof last week, a fox seen crossing the road at dusk. There's always an explanation, even if it's not the right one. You can't help but notice how quickly people shift into roles. Leaders emerge, organizing the salvage of supplies. The old herbalist starts mixing a remedy for coughs that are sure to follow these wet nights. The children, at first frightened, soon begin to chase each other through the mud, turning disaster into a kind of adventure. It's almost comforting how predictably humans cling to routine, even when the world has tipped sideways. In the distance, you hear a bell. The town crier, soaked to the bone, shouts news from the edge of the village. The bridge has been swept away, cutting off the road to the next settlement. You watch faces fall as people realize help won't be coming. Not today, maybe not for days. It's just you and your neighbors against whatever comes next. The rain continues, insistent and relentless, drumming its own funeral march on the cobblestones. A shivering girl, wrapped in her mother's shawl, asks if the river will ever go back to sleep. Her mother strokes her hair and promises that rivers always return to their beds, even if it takes a while. You remember being that small, believing that grown-ups could fix anything, that disasters were temporary and safety always close at hand. Now you know better. Sometimes nature just doesn't care about your plans. Somewhere on the edge of the crowd, old Marta leads a prayer, her voice steady as the rain. It's not a grand or fancy thing, just a few words whispered to whoever might be listening. Keep us safe. Keep our children safe. And if you can't keep the flour dry, at least keep our bread rising. There's a ripple of laughter, grim, grateful, alive. Later, as the day stumbles toward evening, you huddle beneath a scrap of canvas, trying to ignore the ache in your back and the gnawing worry in your gut. The water still inches upward, dragging with it bits of fence, fallen branches, the scattered remains of gardens and yesterday's calm. You close your eyes and listen to the rain, letting its rhythm lull you into a daze. It's in moments like these that the world feels both impossibly vast and painfully small, your entire existence reduced to the patch of ground you're standing on, the warmth of another person's shoulder, the distant promise of a dry bed. You remember stories told by your grandfather, a man who'd seen 3 floods in his time, and swore each one was worse than the last. He used to say, "The river doesn't care about your troubles, it has its own business." Some believed him, others insisted that floods were sent by angry spirits or gods demanding tribute. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuine or just a way for people to cope, to make sense of the chaos that seemed to rise out of nowhere and sweep everything away. By now, night has fallen. The rain finally eases, replaced by a clammy silence that settles over the camp like a shroud. You lie awake, listening to the slow drip of water from the trees, the soft snores of those around you, the restless shifting of animals. Sleep comes in snatches broken by nightmares of water, of houses crumbling, of voices calling for help that never comes. Dawn brings little comfort. The village is half drowned, its streets smeared with silt, its houses sagging and bruised. But the people are still here, still moving, still finding reasons to laugh and grumble and hope. Someone finds a chicken, alive and indignant, perched atop the village sign. The baker manages to scrounge enough flour for a single loaf, sharing it out in thin slices that taste of gratitude and survival. You wander through the ruins, noting what's been lost and what's managed to cling on. The church bell still hangs, though it leans at an odd angle. The ancient oak, battered but standing, shelters a handful of sparrows. Life goes on, in spite of everything. There's work to do, rebuilding, cleaning, comforting, remembering. And in the quiet moments, you wonder what it would be like to live in a world where storms gave fair warning, where rivers stayed politely within their banks, where mornings began with sunlight and the promise of a peaceful day. But that world is not this one. Here you learn to live with uncertainty, to find strength in community, to laugh when you want to cry, and to remember that even when the water rises, you're never truly alone. You're barely catching your breath on the muddy hillside when the talk turns, almost comically if you weren't so cold, to why this happened. Nobody in your world has heard of a Doppler radar or can read a barometer. But everyone in the village has their own private storm calendar, full of warnings handed down in creaky voices and half-remembered tales. Some say, rain like this only comes when the frogs croak at dusk. Others swear by the shape of the clouds, the way the wind circles the church tower, or the curious silence before the thunder rolls. If only you'd watched the swallows last night. Everyone knows if they're flying low, the storm is on its way. Not that medieval weather forecasting could have saved you. Still, it's almost soothing how much time people spend trying to spot the signs. There's old Leofric, pointing with a bony finger at the dew on the grass. Too much dew on a Tuesday means floods by Friday. He's got a rule for every puddle, and you'd laugh if you weren't trying to keep your shoes from floating away. The village wise woman, Githa, is poking at the sky with a stick, muttering about witches combing their hair in the clouds. Historians still argue whether these little rituals were true belief, or simply a way to keep old folks busy. But the truth is, you'd have needed a miracle to predict a storm like this. You hear rumors that in the great monasteries, learned monks keep records of weather, scribbling cloud shapes and moon phases in the margins of prayer books. Some say the monks can summon rain with a Latin chant, or chase away thunder by ringing the big bell just so. Once a travelling merchant claimed to have seen a wizard who could smell rain before it fell and sold amulets to keep lightning away. He was run out of the market when a lightning bolt hit his donkey cart. Ironic, or perhaps just a fringe tidbit to pass along next time you're stuck inside with nothing but thunder for company. Animals, though, have always been better forecasters than humans. It's a running joke, half affectionate, half bitter. When the dogs hide, the storm's not far behind. You remember last evening, how the cows huddled at the far end of the field, how the birds vanished into the hedgerows hours before the first drop fell. Even the rats, clever, sneaky creatures, seem to sense something. It's no wonder people watch them for clues. In times like this, when the world feels big and wild and unfriendly, you'd gladly trade a year's harvest for the nose of a sheepdog. The superstitions run thick. The smith's wife claims she dreamed of a river made of glass, a sign the water spirits were restless. You should have hung a horseshoe over the door, she tells you. Another neighbor scolds herself for forgetting to turn her cloak inside out before bed, a remedy apparently to ward off storms. By midday you hear a dozen new theories. The butter churned too quickly yesterday. The mill's wheel turned backwards at dusk. The church bell rang at the wrong hour. If the rain hasn't washed away your patience, the endless flood of advice just might. It's not all nonsense, though. Out by the orchard you see the men debating whether the wind's direction means a break in the weather or more trouble ahead. You hear snippets of real wisdom, mixed in with the tall tales. When the ants build high hills, dig your ditches deeper. If the crows are restless, keep the children close. It's a patchwork of observation, luck and wishful thinking, passed from parent to child like an heirloom nobody really trusts but nobody wants to throw away. You recall stories of weather wizards employed by lords to protect their estates, men who boasted they could read the future in a bowl of water or the curling smoke of a hearth fire. Some were charlatans, some believed their own trick. There are tales of a bishop who excommunicated a cloud for lingering too long over his church, a fine example of medieval optimism. Historians still argue whether such acts were genuine attempts at controlling the weather or elaborate performances to comfort frightened congregations. The children, of course, absorb every superstition like rain into thirsty soil. One boy claims he saw a black cat run across the bridge just before the storm began. Now the cat is blamed for everything from the swollen river to the loss of his favorite shoe. Two girls braid their hair together, believing this will keep the wind from stealing their voices. The baker's apprentice insists on throwing salt over his shoulder every time the thunder growls. Better safe than sorry. As the hours stretch on and the rain begins to slow, you start to appreciate the strange community these superstitions build. It's easier to endure disaster when you feel you might have some say in its coming, or at least when you can blame someone for forgetting a ritual. There's something almost comforting in the idea that a storm is not just blind chance, but a visitor with rules you might learn to anticipate if only you listen closely enough. Of course, in the bigger towns and cities, where stone buildings stand tall and trade brings travelers from distant lands, there are more elaborate attempts at weather prediction. Learned men gather in smoky halls to debate the merits of Aristotle's theories, or to examine almanacs imported from foreign lands. You once overheard a merchant boasting that, in Venice, the wealthy pay for forecasts written by men who study the stars and the tides. The merchant claimed that, thanks to this advice, his goods always arrived dry. No one in your village truly believes it, but the idea of buying safety from the sky is tempting. Even kings and queens are not immune to superstition. You recall a tale about a queen who insisted on sleeping with her windows shut, no matter the season, because her astrologer warned her that open air called down bad luck. Another story tells of a court where the royal cooks refused to prepare fish on Thursdays after lightning struck the castle kitchens during a Thursday supper. It's amazing, really, how much power a single unlucky event can have over years of tradition. You watch the clouds break, sunlight making brief golden ladders through the ragged sky. The village breathes a sigh of relief, until someone points out that sunshine after heavy rain is a sure sign of more storms to come. The old wisdom says, rain before 7, dry by 11, but no one is willing to trust their fate to a rhyme when half the fields are still underwater. You begin to realize that for all their uncertainty, these weather sayings and animal observations offer more than just prediction. They give people hope, or at least something to do while waiting for the sky to decide your fate. In a world without forecasts or insurance, the shared stories and rituals are a way to claim a little control, however flimsy, over the wild and unpredictable. Besides, if the worst happens, at least you can say you saw it coming. In the twitch of a sheep's ear or the dance of midges in the evening air, you remember, suddenly, a festival held in late spring, when the village gathers to bless the fields. There are prayers, but also songs and little offerings, flowers tossed into the river, bread broken and shared. The priest leads the congregation in asking for gentle weather, while the children tie ribbons to the orchard trees, hoping for enough rain, but not too much. It's part faith, part insurance policy, part community theatre. Someone nearby, shivering under a makeshift cloak, cracks a joke. Next time we ought to ask for less drama and more sunshine. There's laughter, relieved, exhausted. Even now, the urge to turn disaster into story is too strong to resist. There's a deeper truth too. When you see your neighbours scan the sky, trading stories about what the magpies were doing yesterday, you realise that these rituals and sayings aren't just about the weather, they're a way of telling each other, you're not alone in your fear, your helplessness, your awe. Everyone's looking up at the same sky, trying to find patterns in the chaos. You find yourself recalling a fragment of a song sung by your grandmother on stormy nights, when the winds shake the willow and thunder walks the lane. Remember old stories. They'll keep you sane. You smile. If stories could keep the rain out, you'd all be dry by now. But for all the jokes and legends, there's real danger in the uncertainty. Sometimes, trusting the wrong sign can cost lives. There are stories of villagers swept away because the elders insisted the worst was over, or of fishermen lost at sea because they misread a change in the wind. It's no surprise that when disasters strike, blame is quick to follow on the careless, the unlucky, or those who ignored the omens. Historians still argue whether medieval folk genuinely believed every superstition, or if, like you, they half believed and half mocked, using rituals as a comfort in a world too big to predict. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between, belief tangled with habit, fear mingled with hope. As the day draws on and the sun starts its slow descent, the village stirs into motion. People begin to clear the worst of the mud from their thresholds, to check on neighbours and livestock, to salvage what they can. There's talk of a new superstition. Whoever finds a dry stick after a flood will have good luck all year. Children hunt for dry wood, holding each precious twig aloft like treasure. You join them, your eyes scanning the broken world for signs of hope, of weather, of what comes next. You watch a flock of starlings swirl above the flooded meadow, their dance as mysterious and lovely as any prophecy. For a moment, you let yourself believe that the birds know something you don't, that somewhere beyond the heavy clouds, the sky is already clearing. And so you carry on, wrapped in equal parts skepticism and longing, always watching the sky, always listening for the smallest sign, a twitch, a whisper, a cloud shaped just so. It's not perfect, but it's what you have. And maybe, just maybe, it's enough. Mud sticks to your boots like an old grudge as you stumble downhill, eyes fixed on the sluggish water carving new paths through fields you've known your whole life. Around you, the village has transformed into a battlefield, not against an enemy in armor, but against a river swollen with fury and indifference. Every able body is pressed into action. You see men and women, sleeves rolled up, faces smeared with rain and grime, dragging bundles of thatch, barrels, sacks of barley, anything that might slow the advance of the water. Children run messages, fetch tools, or cling to the hems of working adults. Their faces equal parts fear and excitement. The shouting is constant, a muddled chorus of orders, warnings, and pleas for help. The smith, normally a mountain of calm, bellows for more timber to brace the doorways. Two brothers argue over whether it's better to dig a trench or pile mud into a makeshift levee. But in the end, both methods are pressed into service. You can taste the tension, sharp, metallic, almost electric, coursing through the village. Even the animals sense it. The oxen pull against their ropes, snorting and stamping, while the village dogs dart from group to group, tails rigid, eyes wide. You join the human chain, passing heavy stones from the ruined church wall to build a barrier along the main street. The priest hesitates, torn between protecting the house of God and the homes of his flock. He finally nods, better to sacrifice a few stones than the lives behind them. As you heave the cold, mossy rock from hand to hand, you notice the absurdity. The stones that marked centuries of faith now serve as a hurried wall against a far less metaphorical flood. You find yourself pressed against Geetha, the wise woman, who mutters that it's just like the great flood of 78. Someone laughs, How could anyone forget? She says, this time at least, no one's lost a pig yet. You grin, thinking of the family pig, who's already taken shelter beneath the woodpile, eyes narrowed as if daring the water to come closer. There's a moment of levity, but it's short-lived. The river's hungry, and the wall you're building looks frail against its appetite. A mainstream historical fact seeps into your mind. In the Middle Ages, many towns and villages constructed dikes or embankments to hold back rivers, but without the benefit of modern engineering, these defences often failed spectacularly. Chroniclers described how entire communities would labour through the night by lantern light, sometimes succeeding, often losing all in a single, sudden collapse. Today feels no different. You glance up and see the sky darkening once more, the promise of more rain flickering on the horizon. Still, the community's resolve is a living thing. A group of young men form a bucket line to bail out the alehouse. One old man, half-blind, insists on directing the stacking of sandbags, actually flour sacks half-filled with gravel, but nobody's picky in a crisis. The miller's apprentice uses his cap to scoop water from the bakery, pausing now and then to swipe mud from his face. You almost laugh. Who would have guessed that flour, beer, and old stones would be the weapons of your survival? The storm is not a single enemy, but 1,000 little attacks. Water leaking through a wall, mud sliding under a door, wind battering the thatch. You're soaked through to your bones, but it barely registers. There's no time to complain, only time to act, to improvise, to lean on neighbours and pray that something, anything will hold. Quirky tidbits surface in this chaos. The baker, desperate to keep his prized sourdough starter alive, floats it in a little bowl atop a barrel, cooing to it as if it were a baby. The children compete to see who can find the driest spot in the village, a game that ends with 3 of them wedged into a cupboard behind the smithy's forge. Giggling, the village goose, notorious for her temper, swims serenely down the flooded main road, as if nothing could possibly trouble her feathers. You catch sight of a boy tying a scrap of red cloth to the new barricade. He tells you it's for luck, because his grandmother once said red frightens away angry waters. It's nonsense, probably, but nobody asks him to take it down. In times like this, the line between superstition and sensible precaution blurs. You add your own contribution, a sprig of rosemary from your pocket, tucked into a crack in the wall. Historians still argue whether these small rituals were truly believed or simply a way to feel less helpless. Right now, you don't care. Every little comfort counts. Thunder rumbles. Closer now, the sky a heavy, sullen bruise. There's a sudden shriek as the north wall of the grain barn gives way. You dash to help, splintered boards jutting out into the rushing water, grain spilling out like gold lost to the current. It's a bitter loss. Food stores were precious even before the storm, but you have no time to mourn. The carpenter and his son scramble to shore up what remains, their faces set in grim determination. We'll eat mud pies before we starve, someone jokes, and there's a weak chorus of laughter. You wonder privately if anyone here has ever really tasted a mud pie. A flock of sheep, bewildered and woolly, are herded into the churchyard, the last high ground left. You watch as 2 children tie ribbons around their necks, another charm against misfortune, or maybe just a child's way of making sense of the madness. The priest blesses the flock, his words hurried but sincere, and for a fleeting moment everyone pauses, eyes closed as if waiting for a miracle. The world narrows to the work in front of you, passing stones, hammering boards, shouting warnings, checking on neighbours. You barely notice the hours slip by, marked only by the slow, relentless rise of the water and the ever-present ache in your muscles. Occasionally, someone shouts a new rumour. The river's cresting. It's starting to go down. Hope flares and dies as quickly as it comes. You've lived through enough floods to know that rivers don't play by any rules but their own. At one point, you pause to wring water from your cloak, fingers numb and clumsy. A neighbour sidles up, sharing a scrap of jerky and a story about how his great-uncle once survived 3 days on nothing but roasted turnips during a flood. "Never want to see another turnip," he mutters, and you both snort. A little humour in the muck goes a long way. As the sun dips below the trees, the river's roar softens, and a hush falls over the exhausted defenders. You lean against the barricade, chest heaving, legs trembling, watching as the current begins to slow. A battered barrel floats by, followed by someone's boot and, absurdly, a perfectly intact pie cooling on a wooden board. The baker's loss is your gain. You snatch it from the water, earning cheers from the nearest group. It tastes of mud, smoke and triumph. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the water begins to recede. The river, satisfied for now, pulls back, leaving behind a ruined, sodden landscape. You hear sighs of relief weeping, a few hoarse cheers. For a moment, you allow yourself to believe you've won. But as the villagers collapse on the hillside, swapping stories and sharing what little food remains, there's an unspoken knowledge in every glance. This victory is temporary. The river will rise again, and the next time you might not be so lucky. The conversation turns to repairs. Who has the most timber? Can the thatch be salvaged? Whose fields will need to be replanted? There's no sense of triumph, only the grim determination to rebuild. The children, muddy and shivering, are wrapped in blankets and set by the fire. The adults share out bread and ale, each bite a testament to what you've endured together. The village goose, now dry and preening herself beside the fire, receives a hero's welcome. Her calm in the storm has become a symbol of resilience. It's only in the slow, still hours after the storm that the full cost becomes clear. The best fields are now stinking marshland, fences lie flat, and half the houses need new roofs. You find yourself staring at the battered remains of your own home, weighing what's been lost against what's left. A familiar ache settles in your chest, grief for the ruined, gratitude for the spared. Yet, even now, you catch glimpses of stubborn hope. The carpenter promises to rebuild the barn, stronger than before. The smith, already planning repairs to his forge, jokes that maybe the river just wanted a better view of his work. Someone finds the family pig, still under the woodpile, blissfully unaware of the chaos above. You smile, exhaustion turning your grin crooked, but genuine. In the weeks to come, the village will bear the scars of the flood. Mud-caked stones, water-stained timbers, gardens half-saved, but you'll also remember the moments of courage. The neighbor who pulled a stranger from the current, the impromptu stew made from whatever could be salvaged, the laughter echoing over the ruined fields at dusk. It's a reminder that even in the face of nature's fury, you are not powerless. There is always something you can do, even if it's just passing a stone, tying a red ribbon, or sharing a joke in the rain. The night falls, soft and uncertain, bringing with it a sense of relief and trepidation. Fires flicker across the hillside, families gathered close. You wrap yourself in a dry blanket, miracle of miracles, and listen as the old tales start anew. Someone recounts the story of the time a flood washed away the church bell, and it was found 2 years later, miles downstream, ringing faintly in the night. The children gasp, the adults nod, each of you clinging to the stories that make sense of chaos. Historians still argue whether these communal efforts, these frantic, makeshift barricades, these nights spent huddled together, actually made much difference against nature's full strength. Some chroniclers write of villages saved by the strength of their walls. Others admit that all the courage in the world can't stop a river determined to rewrite the landscape. But to you, standing in the mud, hands raw and heart sore, it's clear, even if the walls fall, what you build together in the struggle is never lost. Tomorrow will bring new work, repairs, reckonings, maybe more rain, but for tonight you find a kind of peace in the simple act of survival, in the warm bodies pressed close, in the soft, persistent hope that somehow you'll endure whatever comes next. You wake to a sky the color of old wool, heavy with the promise of more rain. For a moment you lie still on your makeshift bedding, the taste of damp straw on your tongue, and wish you were somewhere else. anywhere dry, warm, and safe. But the ache in your limbs and the distant sound of a cow bellowing remind you that the flood is not a dream you can shake off. It's your new reality, and you have to rise to meet it. When you pull yourself up and step outside, you see that the water has retreated overnight. But it has left something worse in its wake, a thick, clinging mud that covers everything. The fields are no longer fields, but a slick expanse of brown. Your vegetable garden, which you planted with such hope in the spring, is buried beneath silt. The few green leaves still visible look like they're drowning. As you pick your way toward the village square, you notice the hush that has settled over everyone. It's not the roar of the storm that terrifies you today. It's the silence. A neighbor waves you over. You recognize the pinched look on her face before she speaks. The grain stores are soaked, she says flatly. Half's probably ruined. She doesn't need to say what you're all thinking. If the harvest was lost to the water, the coming winter will be something no one's stomach is ready for. Starvation in medieval times isn't the slow cinematic suffering you sometimes imagine from old tapestries. It's quieter, crueler, a creeping weakness that begins when the bread loaves grow thin, when the last dried apples vanish from the cellar. A single flood can wipe out months of work, leaving people to barter, beg, or steal to keep their families alive. You've heard tales of whole hamlets dissolving in a season, the people scattering like seeds in search of food. Some of the elders remember the famine of 20 years ago when the rains came early and stayed for weeks. They still talk about it in low voices, the animals so thin their bones showed through, the bread that stretched further and further with every meal, until it was more chaff than flour. Historians still argue whether that famine was entirely caused by weather or whether the Lord's taxes made everything worse. But you don't care much for the details. All you know is that you don't want to see those hollow eyes again on your neighbors or reflected back at you from the basin of water you use as a mirror. You join the others sorting what can be saved. Grain that was stored in barrels, up high on platforms, might have survived. The lower sacks are heavy with moisture, and when you press your hand against them, they ooze a sour, hopeless smell. Some villagers argue over whether it's worth trying to dry it out. Maybe if the sun comes, they say. Maybe if we spread it thin on boards. Maybe, but you can see the doubt etched into their faces. You spend the next hours hauling damp sheaves into the meager light, your arms burning with every lift. Children follow behind, their small hands picking out the worst of the rot. Some of them are still young enough to think of this as a game. One girl giggles every time she finds a half-buried beetle, holding it aloft like a prize. You force yourself to smile back, though your heart feels too heavy to rise to the surface. Midday comes, and with it, a short break to share whatever food you can find. You chew slowly on a heel of bread that tastes of river water. It's not much, but it's enough to keep you upright. Around you, people murmur about what they've lost: chickens drowned, cabbages spoiled, flour turned to paste. Each loss is small on its own, but together they make a story too big to ignore. When the meal ends, you turn to salvaging tools from the flooded sheds. Iron rusts quickly in this damp air. You find scythes so caked in mud you wonder if they'll ever be sharp again, but you clean them anyway, because hope is stubborn. And even in the face of ruin, you cling to the idea that the fields will grow again if you just keep trying. One man shows you a handful of beans he managed to save, cupping them like jewels. They'll sprout, he says, though you can hear the question behind his certainty. You nod and tell him it's enough for a start. You both pretend it's the truth. The day crawls by in a haze of mud and monotony. By evening you've sorted what's salvageable and set it out to dry, trusting the patchy sun to do its work. You stand with your hands on your hips, surveying the rows of damp grain, the crooked piles of straw, the empty spaces where plenty once sat. It doesn't look like much, but it's what you have left. Nearby, the carpenter sits on an overturned bucket, mending a broken cart. He glances up and says, "Funny, isn't it? How a flood can take everything but still leave you with chores." You laugh, though it comes out more like a cough. He's right. Disaster doesn't free you from the everyday tasks. If anything, it doubles them. As night falls, the village gathers in the church, the only building that stayed mostly dry. You press in with the others, grateful for the warmth of so many bodies in a single space. The priest offers a prayer for the coming days, for patience, for strength, for mercy. You bow your head and let the words wash over you, even though you're not sure if anyone is listening. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. You once heard that in some regions, people believed floodwaters carried spirits with them, restless souls who stirred up sickness and despair wherever they went. It sounds ridiculous now, but as you look around the room and see the pale faces, the hollow eyes, you almost believe it. Maybe the river didn't just drown your crops. Maybe it brought something dark. Still, you sleep that night with a strange sort of peace. The worst of the storm has passed, and while the work ahead feels endless, at least you can start it in daylight. You dream of fields green again, of granaries full, of children chasing each other through rows of barley that grow tall enough to hide them. You dream of ordinary things, because sometimes hope hides itself in the mundane. Morning comes, and you step back outside into the cold dawn. Your muscles ache in ways you didn't think possible, and your fingers are cracked and swollen from the damp. But you move, because you must. There's no one coming to save you, no magic cure for a ruined harvest, only your own hands, and the hands of those around you. As the sun climbs, you notice a few green shoots where the water has receded. It's not much, but it's proof that life persists even when everything seems lost. You kneel and touch the tender leaves, and for the first time in days, you feel something close to relief. There will be hunger. There will be arguments over who deserves the last sack of grain. There will be nights when the children go to bed with their bellies half empty, but there will also be mornings like this. Small miracles pushing up through the mud, reminding you that the world doesn't end all at once. Sometimes it rebuilds itself in secret, leaf by stubborn leaf. You straighten, taking in the sight of your neighbors at work. Some are mending fences, others are checking livestock or carrying supplies to higher ground. No one is idle. Even the children have found small jobs, collecting firewood or fetching water from the nearest clean well. It's a kind of quiet defiance, an unspoken refusal to surrender to despair. You join them, and as the hours pass, the rhythm of labor soothes you. The scrape of a shovel against wet earth, the creak of a wheelbarrow under its load, the soft thud of hay being stacked to dry. Each sound is proof that life continues. By dusk you've patched the worst holes in your roof, set aside a small store of grain that might survive, and traded stories with your neighbors. Someone starts a song, an old harvest tune, and soon voices join in. Thin but steady, the words catch in your throat, but you sing anyway. Later, as you settle by the fire, you remember something an old woman told you long ago. Floods don't care about your plans, but they don't last forever. You repeat the words to yourself, like a charm against the darkness. And though your belly is hollow and your future uncertain, you believe, just for tonight, that she was right. You wake in the thin, grey dawn, to the sound of a bell tolling over the ruined village. It's a slow, mournful sound, not an alarm or a summons, but a kind of communal sigh, a way of telling everyone that the world hasn't quite righted itself overnight. The water may have pulled back, but the wreckage remains, and you are left to reckon with the damage. When you step outside, the air smells of churned mud and wet straw, but there is a hush too, as if even the birds are holding their breath. You pick your way over the sodden path to the churchyard, where people gather in small clusters, eyes downcast. The storm has spared no one, every house bears its marks. Walls bowed from the pressure of the flood, thatch torn loose and dangling like soaked hair, fences scattered in pieces as if flung by an angry hand. Someone points toward the chapel doors. Inside, the villagers have laid out what they've saved: blankets, half-rotted sacks of barley, a few chickens huddled together as if conspiring. But alongside the practical offerings are other, stranger tokens: votive candles, small carved figurines, a handful of coins left in a chipped wooden bowl. These are gifts to the saints, or perhaps just to the air itself, pleas for protection against a power too big to comprehend. You've heard it said that medieval folk were fatalists, resigned to whatever calamity the sky chose to deliver. But standing here, you feel the quiet defiance in every careful gesture, the way someone sweeps the chapel steps clean, though more rain will surely come, or how a mother smooths a cloth over her sleeping child's hair. If there is resignation, it's the sort that grows out of necessity, not weakness. You learn to endure because you have no other choice. By mid-morning, the priest emerges, robes muddied at the hem. His face is drawn, but resolute. He lifts his hands and begins a prayer, voice low and hoarse. Lord, we do not question your will, but we ask your mercy. The words drift over you, half heard. You are remembering the night before, when the storm had reached its loudest and you thought in one unguarded moment that this must be punishment. Perhaps you weren't alone in that thought. As the prayer ends, a hush follows, and you sense the unspoken questions swirling between everyone. Why now? Why this village? You recall how, in better times, the priest would remind you that hardship was a test, an opportunity to prove your faith. But today, the words sound hollow. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed every disaster was divine judgment, or whether it was simply easier to imagine an angry God than an indifferent universe. Maybe it doesn't matter. When the storm takes your roof and spoils your harvest, you're left searching for any reason at all. When the prayers are finished, the congregation doesn't disperse immediately. Instead, the priest begins to prepare a ritual of cleansing holy water sprinkled over the doorways, a procession meant to purify the village. You remember last year's Feast of Saints Within, when the same ritual was performed in celebration. How different it feels now, when the air still tastes of loss. One by one, families approach the threshold to be blessed. Some kneel, others bow their heads. You wait your turn, unsure if you are seeking forgiveness, protection, or simply the reassurance of routine. When the priest reaches you, he marks your forehead with the sign of the cross, the water cold against your skin. For a moment your chest loosens, as if you've been holding your breath for days. You step outside into the weak sunlight, blinking at the brightness. Across the square you see Githa the wise woman tying a sprig of rosemary above the chapel door. She catches your eye and shrugs. "Can't hurt," she mutters. A few people smile, but no one argues. In times like this, sacred and practical blur together. The rest of the day unfolds in a slow rhythm of recovery. You join a line of neighbours passing stones to rebuild the low wall that once marked the boundary between the churchyard and the fields. Each rock is heavy with silt, and your hands are soon raw from the work. But you keep going, because to stand still is worse. When you pause to drink, you notice a man setting out a small wooden statue near the water's edge. It's a carving of a saint, Saint Nicholas, if the shape of the mitre is anything to go by. He props it on a rock facing the river, as if daring the water to come again. You almost laugh, but something in the gesture moves you. It is a declaration, in its own quiet way. We are still here. A few children drift over, drawn by curiosity. One of them, a girl with hair like copper wire, asks whether the saint will keep the river away. The man hesitates, then says, "He might," and that seems to be enough. The girl touches the statue's tiny hand, her expression solemn. Later, as you help spread salvageable grain on woven mats to dry, you catch fragments of conversations. Some wonder whether the flood was punishment for pride. There had been talk before the rains came of expanding the village, of building a new granary. Others recall that a travelling friar had warned of God's displeasure. It all feels a little too convenient, but no one says so aloud. Quirky beliefs have a way of multiplying after a calamity. You hear of neighbours who swear they saw ghostly figures walking in the shallows at dusk. Others claim the storm was the work of witches in the next valley over, envious of your harvest. One man insists he heard the church bell ringing by itself the night the waters rose. Some of it sounds absurd, but you don't scoff. You've seen too much to dismiss any possibility outright. By afternoon, the priest organizes a procession through the village. Everyone is invited to walk the main street, carrying candles or sprigs of greenery. You join in, partly out of respect, partly because it feels good to move with a purpose. The line of people stretches from the chapel doors to the far end of the square, a wavering trail of light and intention. The priest stops at each doorway, murmuring prayers for protection. You watch as he blesses the smithy, where the forge stands silent, and the inn, where barrels of ale have been spoiled. Every stop is a reminder of what has been lost, and of what still needs saving. When your own doorstep is reached, you step forward, holding your candle high. The priest touches your shoulder, then recites a prayer so familiar you could whisper the words yourself. You feel the warmth of the flame in your hands, small but insistent against the gloom. As the procession moves on, you stand a moment longer, the candle flickering in the breeze. You think of all the times you've passed through this doorway without noticing it, how easily you assumed it would always be there. It strikes you in that moment that gratitude is a discipline you're still learning. The day fades to dusk. Candles gutter and die one by one, leaving only the glow of hearth fires behind cracked shutters. You return to the chapel to help store the last of the supplies. Inside, the air smells of wet wool and smoke. Someone has laid out a pot of soup, thin but hot, and you take your share, grateful for its warmth. As you eat, you hear the priest telling a story to a circle of children. It's about Noah and the flood, how the ark was built, how the animals were saved. The children listen with wide eyes, their faces soft in the lamplight. You remember hearing the same story when you were small, imagining the rain drumming on the ark's roof while the world vanished beneath the waves. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly believed they were reenacting biblical trials in times of flood, or whether the stories were simply a framework, a way to wrap disaster in meaning. You suspect it's both. Even now, with mud still drying on your boots, you feel a small comfort in the idea that survival makes you part of something older than yourself. The soup is gone too soon. You stand and stretch, joints stiff, and step outside one last time before bed. The moon has risen, silvering the ragged edges of the village. For all its ruin, it is still yours. You breathe in the cold air and let it fill your lungs. In the quiet, you find a fragile sort of peace. Whatever else has been taken, the night sky remains unchanged, a canopy of stars that have watched countless floods come and go. And as you turn back toward the shelter of the chapel, you realize that perhaps that is enough. The bell tolls from the old abbey on the hill, the monastery that has watched over the village longer than anyone alive can remember. As you climb the slope, your breath catching in your chest, you catch glimpses of figures darting in and out of the great wooden door. The floodwaters have receded from the fields and the square, but here on the heights they've left behind a different kind of ruin. Sodden scrolls, warped chests, and the terrible smell of wet vellum. Monks are everywhere, some hauling buckets of water from the storerooms, others gently lifting bound volumes from the flooded scriptorium. You stop in the doorway, struck by the sight. Shelves once straight and orderly now collapsed into themselves, ancient pages fanned out like the wings of dead birds. The brothers work in hushed urgency, each movement precise but tinged with heartbreak. You realize with a sick lurch that centuries of knowledge are dissolving before your eyes. Your hands are still raw from hauling stones and soaking grain when you hear the alarm bell again. This time rung not in warning but in desperation. A thin, urgent clamour that slices through the dawn hush, calling you back into the struggle before you've even had a chance to close your eyes. You don't hesitate. You grab your cloak and hurry toward the sound, feet slipping on the wet flagstones as you run. Someone presses a length of linen into your hands. "Wrap whatever you can save," he says, voice tight. You nod, though your fingers tremble. As you cross the threshold, the damp air closes over you, thick as grief. You bend to the nearest shelf and slide your arms under a stack of manuscripts. The leather bindings are so soft with water, they almost melt against your skin. You carry them to a table near the window, where an elderly monk directs a triage of sorts. Parchment too far gone is set aside, without ceremony. The rest is blotted, pressed flat and laid out in the pale morning light. Every volume you touch feels like a tiny life clinging to the edge of survival. Some are prayer books, familiar Latin phrases already blurring into unreadable smears. Others are stranger, illuminated treatises on plants and animals, chronicles of kings and famines, diagrams of the stars. Each is irreplaceable, and each is dying a little more with every minute the damp clings to it. Between loads you catch glimpses of others at their work. One monk daubs pigment back into the gold leaf of a psalter, as if beauty itself is worth preserving against the rot. Another kneels in a corner, hands clasped tight around a tiny reliquary, whispering a prayer too soft to hear. Even here, where devotion is meant to point heavenward, there's no denying the heartbreak in the brothers' eyes. They are men of faith, but also men of ink and parchment, and it's hard to see the work of lifetimes sinking into the same mud as the fields below. The old monk sighs, lifting a crumbling page between careful fingers. Historians still argue whether floods are God's cleansing hand, he murmurs, or just another reminder that nothing here lasts. His eyes meet yours. Either way we try, and so you do. For hours you ferry books and scrolls from the shelves to the drying tables. The cold seeps up through your shoes, mud spatters your hem, but you don't stop, not even when your arms go numb, because while a ruined harvest can be replanted, a ruined library is like a memory torn from the world. By mid-morning, the worst of the water has been mopped away. The floors are slick, but passable. You find yourself in a side chamber you'd never noticed before, a narrow vaulted room lined with iron-bound chests. A young scribe kneels over an open chest, lifting out bundles wrapped in oilcloth. When he sees you, relief crosses his face. "Help me," he says simply. And you do. Together you unwrap the bundles, revealing more volumes, Bibles, charters, delicate sheets of music inked in black and red. The oilcloth has saved many of them, but not all. Some pages come away stained and stuck together. You lay them out as gently as you can, trying not to imagine how many hands copied them, how many voices once read them aloud. Now and then, someone shouts when a volume breaks apart. Each cry is a small funeral, and each time the room falls quiet. But the work continues. The work must always continue. At one point the scribe chuckles, a thin, rueful sound. He holds up a scrap of parchment so smudged it's almost blank. "This was a treatise on flood control," he says. "Oh, the irony. You can't help but laugh, even though your throat feels tight. Sometimes the world's humor is cruel, but it is still humor. Hours pass this way, an endless rhythm of salvage and sorrow. Now and then you pause to flex your hands, raw from lifting damp volumes. You glance out the narrow window and see that the village is stirring too, men reinforcing the riverbank, women hauling dry wood into stacks. For all the damage, life goes on. At midday, a bell chimes and the monks gather in the refectory to share a meal. You join them because no one asks you to leave. The benches are crowded with damp bodies, and the air smells of mildew and stewed turnips. A thin broth is ladled into wooden bowls, hardly a feast, but enough to quiet the ache in your stomach. You nod. In your heart you understand. Food keeps the body alive. Stories keep the soul from turning to stone. After the meal, you return to the scriptorium. The sun has climbed higher, throwing narrow beams across the drying tables. The warmth feels like a blessing. You work with new determination, knowing that every hour counts. The pages you save today might be the only record of your world tomorrow. Across the table, the elderly monk with the tired eyes studies the remnants of a codex, the ink lifting from the page in delicate blisters. "People will ask why we bothered," he says softly. "They'll say we should have saved grain or livestock." He glances up. "But when the fields are green again, what will we remember? What will we teach our children if not these words?" But when you look at the faces around you, tired, Hollow-eyed, yet still intent on their tasks. You see the truth. The fight is not over. It may never be. Not really. Every season brings its own trials, and every generation must learn again how to endure. As afternoon deepens, the air shifts. A breeze moves through the broken windows, lifting the parchment corners in a slow, rippling dance. For a moment you let yourself imagine that the worst is over, that the sun will stay, that the river will shrink back to its banks, that no new storm is waiting just beyond the hills. Still, you work. You wrap another bundle in dry cloth. You help stack them on a high shelf. You carry a pail of muddy water out the door and throw it onto the weeds. Each small act feels almost sacred, proof that you have not surrendered to despair. And when the light finally begins to fade, you step back and survey what has been saved. The walls are still scarred with damp. The shelves are emptier than before, but there are books here that will survive, books that will be read again, their words carried forward into whatever future comes next. Outside, the evening bells toll again, a slow, steady cadence that reminds you to breathe. You leave the abbey as dusk settles over the village, your steps heavy but sure. As you pass the low wall that marks the edge of the churchyard, you pause to look back. In the fading light, the old monastery seems almost untouched, its towers rising serene above the mud. You know it's an illusion, but in this moment you're glad for it. The young scribe stands beside you, wiping his hands on his robe. "Thank you," he says simply. You want to tell him it was nothing, but you can't quite make your voice work, so you just nod, and together you watch the last rays of sun slide across the battered floor. Your hands are still raw from hauling stones and soaking grain when you hear the alarm bell again, this time rung not in warning but in desperation. A thin, urgent clamour that slices through the dawn hush, calling you back into the struggle before you've even had a chance to close your eyes. You don't hesitate. You grab your cloak and hurry toward the sound, feet slipping on the wet flagstones as you run. The bell tolls from the old abbey on the hill, the monastery that has watched over the village longer than anyone alive can remember. As you climb the slope, your breath catching in your chest, you catch glimpses of figures darting in and out of the great wooden door. The floodwaters have receded from the fields and the square, but here on the heights they've left behind a different kind of ruin. Sodden scrolls, warped chests, and the terrible smell of wet vellum. Monks are everywhere, some hauling buckets of water from the storerooms, others gently lifting bound volumes from the flooded scriptorium. You stop in the doorway, struck by the sight. Shelves once straight and orderly now collapsed into themselves, ancient pages fanned out like the wings of dead birds. The brothers work in hushed urgency, each movement precise but tinged with heartbreak. You realize with a sick lurch that centuries of knowledge are dissolving before your eyes. Someone presses a length of linen into your hands. "Wrap whatever you can save," he says, voice tight. You nod, though your fingers tremble. As you cross the threshold, the damp air closes over you, thick as grief. You bend to the nearest shelf and slide your arms under a stack of manuscripts. The leather bindings are so soft with water, they almost melt against your skin. You carry them to a table near the window, where an elderly monk directs a triage of sorts. Parchment too far gone is set aside, without ceremony. The rest is blotted, pressed flat and laid out in the pale morning light. Every volume you touch feels like a tiny life clinging to the edge of survival. Some are prayer books, familiar Latin phrases already blurring into unreadable smears. Others are stranger, illuminated treatises on plants and animals, chronicles of kings and famines, diagrams of the stars. Each is irreplaceable, and each is dying a little more with every minute the damp clings to it. The old monk sighs, lifting a crumbling page between careful fingers. "Historians still argue whether floods are God's cleansing hand," he murmurs, "or just another reminder that nothing here lasts." His eyes meet yours. "Either way we try." And so you do. For hours you ferry books and scrolls from the shelves to the drying tables. The cold seeps up through your shoes. Mud spatters your hem. But you don't stop, not even when your arms go numb, because while a ruined harvest can be replanted, A ruined library is like a memory torn from the world. Between loads, you catch glimpses of others at their work. One monk daubs pigment back into the gold leaf of a psalter, as if beauty itself is worth preserving against the rot. Another kneels in a corner, hands clasped tight around a tiny reliquary, whispering a prayer too soft to hear. Even here, where devotion is meant to point heavenward, there's no denying the heartbreak in the brothers' eyes. They are men of faith, but also men of ink and parchment, and it's hard to see the work of lifetimes sinking into the same mud as the fields below. Now and then, someone shouts when a volume breaks apart. Each cry is a small funeral, and each time the room falls quiet. But the work continues. The work must always continue. By mid-morning, the worst of the water has been mopped away. The floors are slick, but passable. You find yourself in a side chamber you'd never noticed before, a narrow vaulted room lined with iron-bound chests. A young scribe kneels over an open chest, lifting out bundles wrapped in oilcloth. When he sees you, relief crosses his face. "Help me," he says simply. And you do. Together you unwrap the bundles, revealing more volumes, Bibles, charters, delicate sheets of music inked in black and red. The oilcloth has saved many of them, but not all. Some pages come away stained and stuck together. You lay them out as gently as you can, trying not to imagine how many hands copied them, how many voices once read them aloud. At one point the scribe chuckles, a thin, rueful sound. He holds up a scrap of parchment so smudged it's almost blank. "This was a treatise on flood control," he says. "Oh, the irony." You can't help but laugh, even though your throat feels tight. Sometimes the world's humor is cruel, but it is still humor. Hours pass this way, an endless rhythm of salvage and sorrow. Now and then you pause to flex your hands, raw from lifting damp volumes. You glance out the narrow window and see that the village is stirring too, men reinforcing the riverbank, women hauling dry wood into stacks. For all the damage, life goes on. At midday, a bell chimes and the monks gather in the refectory to share a meal. You join them because no one asks you to leave. The benches are crowded with damp bodies, and the air smells of mildew and stewed turnips. A thin broth is ladled into wooden bowls, hardly a feast, but enough to quiet the ache in your stomach. Across the table, the elderly monk with the tired eyes studies the remnants of a codex, the ink lifting from the page in delicate blisters. "People will ask why we bothered," he says softly. "They'll say we should have saved grain or livestock." He glances up. "But when the fields are green again, what will we remember? What will we teach our children if not these words?" You nod. In your heart you understand. Food keeps the body alive. Stories keep the soul from turning to stone. After the meal, you return to the scriptorium. The sun has climbed higher, throwing narrow beams across the drying tables. The warmth feels like a blessing. You work with new determination, knowing that every hour counts. The pages you save today might be the only record of your world tomorrow. As afternoon deepens, the air shifts. A breeze moves through the broken windows, lifting the parchment corners in a slow, rippling dance. For a moment you let yourself imagine that the worst is over, that the sun will stay, that the river will shrink back to its banks, that no new storm is waiting just beyond the hills. But when you look at the faces around you, tired, hollow-eyed, yet still intent on their tasks, you see the truth. The fight is not over. It may never be. Not really. Every season brings its own trials, and every generation must learn again how to endure. Still, you work. You wrap another bundle in dry cloth. You help stack them on a high shelf. You carry a pail of muddy water out the door and throw it onto the weeds. Each small act feels almost sacred, proof that you have not surrendered to despair. And when the light finally begins to fade, you step back and survey what has been saved. The walls are still scarred with damp. The shelves are emptier than before, but there are books here that will survive, books that will be read again, their words carried forward into whatever future comes next. The young scribe stands beside you, wiping his hands on his robe. "Thank you," he says simply. You want to tell him it was nothing, but you can't quite make your voice work, so you just nod, and together you watch the last rays of sun slide across the battered floor. Outside, the evening bells toll again, a slow, steady cadence that reminds you to breathe. You leave the abbey as dusk settles over the village, your steps heavy but sure. As you pass the low wall that marks the edge of the churchyard, you pause to look back. In the fading light, the old monastery seems almost untouched, its towers rising serene above the mud. You know it's an illusion, but in this moment you're glad for it. By the time you return to your own threshold, the stars are beginning to prick through the darkness. You wash the mud from your hands and sit down in the quiet. Your body aches in every joint, your eyelids droop, but your heart feels steadier than it has in days. Perhaps you think, that's the true gift of this place, the knowledge that even when storms come without warning, when the water takes what you love most, you can still save something. A scrap of parchment, a fragment of a story, a small proof that you were here, that you mattered. And as you close your eyes at last, you hold on to that thought, letting it carry you into the darkness like a lantern against the flood. The morning after your long vigil at the monastery arrives with a softness that feels almost insulting, like the world is pretending nothing happened. The sky is pale blue, streaked with a few harmless-looking clouds. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was a gift, a sign the worst has passed. But you have learned in these last days that nature rarely plays fair. You walk the path from your house toward the village green, careful to skirt the largest puddles. Every step leaves a mark in the black mud, a record of your passage that will stay until the next rain washes it away. All around you, people emerge from their homes, blinking in the new light. Their faces are tired and pinched, but no longer shocked. The panic of the first flood has given way to something harder, something more enduring, a steady, exhausted resolve. You see it in the way the miller shoulders his rake without being asked, in the way the weaver's wife ties her hair back and starts sorting ruined cloth, in the way the children take up baskets and begin collecting scraps of wood. No one waits for orders. Everyone simply begins again. Today, though, it is not the common folk who face the worst reckonings. As you cross the square, you spot a line of men-at-arms near the Lord's Hall, mud caked up to the brass fittings on their boots. One of them glances your way, then back to the great doors which are propped wide to air out the reek of wet rushes and spoiled meat. You follow their gaze and feel an unexpected flicker of curiosity, for while the flood has stolen plenty from the poor, it has also climbed the steps of the mighty, and no rank or title has spared them. You edge closer, careful to look as if you belong, and peer inside. The grand hall is a study in quiet disaster. The carved chairs are warped, their gilded paint peeling in white flakes. Tapestries hang in sodden tatters, their once brilliant scenes of battles and coronations reduced to streaks of blue and rust. The Lord himself stands near the hearth, though the fire has long since drowned. His fine cloak is spattered with silt. In his hand, he holds a length of parchment that droops like a wet leaf. You almost feel pity. Almost. For as much as you and your neighbours have lost, it is nothing compared to the humiliation the flood has dealt the ruling class. The river has not distinguished between peasant and noble, and in this sudden equality there is something darkly satisfying. You watch as the steward gestures helplessly at a row of chests stacked against the far wall. You can imagine what's inside: documents declaring the boundaries of land, lists of rents owed, decrees of authority, all the things that prove the power of the man standing with his boots in the mud. The steward peels open the lid of a chest and lets out a noise halfway between a groan and a sob. Rolls of parchment are fused together into a single bloated mass. You hear someone mutter that the flood has washed away half the evidence of fealty in the Shire. The thought makes you want to smile, though you suppress it. Even in disaster, you are supposed to show deference. Someone at the Lord's side raises their voice. "Get the scribes, we must inventory everything that can be copied." The words drift out the door, reaching the ears of the crowd that has begun to gather. You exchange a look with a woman you know from the green, a look that says plainly, "Imagine thinking you can simply write the river away." Still, you move on before you draw notice. Though the Lord's fortunes have sunk, he remains the Lord, and it does you no good to appear openly amused. But as you make your way back into the sunlight, the absurdity lingers with you. All that wealth, all that privilege, undone in a single night of rain. You're reminded of an old saying your grandmother favoured: "A full belly and a full purse are only safe until the river comes to dinner." You never really understood it until now. Back among the common folk, the work continues in the same quiet, relentless way it has since the flood began. A group of villagers have formed a line to clear debris from the main road. Splintered fences, thatch bundles, a collapsed cart. You take your place among them, gripping the edge of a broken barrel with hands that are already blistered. Each lift is a small act of defiance, proof that you will not allow the water to have the final word. As you work, scraps of conversation drift up and down the line. Some talk of the coming weeks, of rationing, of repairing roofs, of replanting anything that might still grow. Others recall floods in years past, comparing this one to disasters remembered by their grandparents. Historians still argue whether the flood of 48 was worse. Someone says, though no one is much interested in settling the debate today. The past offers no comfort when you're ankle deep in the present. When the road is cleared, you pause to rest. A man you've seen before, but never spoken to, sits beside you on the overturned cart shaft. He's middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with a face lined by weather. He nods in greeting and passes you a strip of dried fish. You accept it without comment. In times like this, the smallest kindnesses matter more than any title. "You see the Lord's Hall?" he asks after a moment. You nod. "Funny," he says. "All that talk of divine right, and in the end, the river doesn't care." You chew your fish and say nothing, but in your heart you agree. There is a kind of grim fairness in the flood's indiscriminate hunger. Rich or poor, proud or humble, all must reckon with the same water. By midday, the sun has warmed the village enough that you can shed your cloak. You tie it around your waist and walk the perimeter of the green, assessing what else must be done. There are fences to repair, barrels to scrub clean, and cellars to empty. The list of tasks is endless, and yet as you pass your neighbours, you see no surrender in their faces, only determination and a weariness too deep for words. At the edge of the square, the blacksmith and his apprentices are already repairing tools. You pause to watch as they oil a row of iron hinges laid out on a plank. The work is slow, but necessary. Without tools, nothing else can be rebuilt. As the afternoon wears on, you join a group patching holes in the common barn. The thatch has been ripped away in broad swathes, leaving the beams exposed to the sky. You climb the ladder with a bundle of reeds balanced on your shoulder, your arms trembling with fatigue. At the top, you work alongside the carpenter's son, who hums tunelessly as he weaves the reeds into place. He does not look at you, but his presence is reassuring. Up here, the two of you are removed from the ruin below, suspended in a space of simple labour. From this height, you can see the Lord's Hall in the distance. The servants are still ferrying ruined tapestries out into the sun. You wonder if the Lord himself feels the same bone-deep weariness you do, or if his pride refuses to admit it. Perhaps it doesn't matter. The river has proved that all are equal in the end. When the last bundle of reeds is secured, you climb down and wipe your hands on your tunic. The carpenter's son nods in silent acknowledgement, then turns back to his work. You leave him there, moving like an automaton, and head for the well. The water there is cold and clean, miraculously spared from the filth of the flood. You cup your hands and drink deeply, feeling it sluice away some of the grit in your throat. As you stand, you catch sight of your reflection in the well's dark surface. You hardly recognize yourself. Your face is gaunt, your eyes ringed with fatigue, but there is something steadier in your gaze than you remember. You have faced the water. You have not turned away. As dusk falls, you make your way home, The path is easier now, cleared of the worst debris. Along the way you pass the chapel, where candles flicker in every window. You pause, drawn by the soft glow. Inside, the priest is alone, tending the altar. You do not enter, but you stand in the doorway, watching. After a moment he looks up and meets your eyes. He does not speak, but his nod is enough. A recognition that you are both still here, still enduring. When you reach your threshold, you find that someone has left a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is a loaf of bread, still warm. You press it to your chest for a moment before carrying it inside. You don't know who left it, but you suspect it doesn't matter. In times like this, gifts are given without expectation. You sit by the hearth and break the bread into pieces, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. Outside, the village settles into a fragile peace. The night air carries the scent of damp earth and something else, something almost like hope. And as you close your eyes, you feel a quiet certainty that the river will rise again someday. But so will you. At first light, you are already awake. You lie on your pallet for a moment, listening to the sounds of the village stirring back to life, boots crunching in the drying mud, the creak of ox carts being righted, the low murmur of voices tempered by exhaustion. The air feels different this morning, thinner, as if the storm has carried something away you can't quite name. You roll to your side, bracing a hand against the wall, and draw a long, steady breath. The memory of the flood is stitched into your muscles, your skin still prickling with the phantom chill of rising water. But the sky above is clear, and that alone feels like a gift. Before the flood, the merchants who travelled the roads near your village were fond of bragging about the way the sea had opened their fortunes. A fair wind is as good as a chest of silver, they would say, eyes alight at the promise of trade. You used to envy that, the certainty that the wind and waves could be harnessed for gain instead of fear, but you've seen now how quickly the sea and sky can turn on even the bravest sailors. Today your path leads you down to the riverbank, where the wreckage of the village's little fleet has washed ashore. You walk slowly among the battered hulls, noting which boats have any hope of repair. The sight is sobering. Keels snapped in two, masts splintered, nets so tangled with riverweed you doubt they'll ever be whole again. Still, the fishermen are already here, sleeves rolled to their elbows, hauling planks and unspooling wet ropes. No one has to tell them what to do. They understand that in a place like this, you don't wait for permission to begin again. You pause to watch as an old man, Roderick, whose hands are as gnarled as tree roots, kneels beside his skiff. The boat is half buried in silt, the boards warped and cracked, but his expression is not despairing. With the tip of a knife he tests the grain of the wood, then nods to himself. You recognize that gesture, the quiet promise that even when the sea has tried to claim you, you will not yield everything. You help him dig the skiff free, working shoulder to shoulder until the hull is clear. It takes nearly an hour to heave it onto higher ground. When it's done, you both sit back in the grass, breathing hard. Roderick pulls a bit of dried apple from his pouch and offers you a piece. You accept it, your fingers brushing his, and for a moment you simply eat together in silence. He breaks it only to say, "My father built this boat." His voice is soft, but there's no mistaking the pride there. She's seen more storms than you or I will ever count. You glance at the battered skiff and smile. She'll see a few more yet. He grunts, satisfied, and that is the end of the conversation. Further down the bank, others are not so lucky. One young fisherman stands alone, staring at the place where his vessel used to be. Nothing remains but a coil of rope and a single oar. His face is blank, as if he hasn't decided whether to weep or scream. You know he'll find a way to start over. You all will, but in that moment you feel a pang of something close to mourning. Because the river hasn't merely washed away property, it's swallowed livelihoods, futures carefully planned, the sense of certainty that any harvest or catch will last. No storm ever destroys only the present. It claws at every hope you pinned to tomorrow. Still, there are small victories. You hear a cheer as someone hauls up a crate half buried in the mud. Inside are salted fish, miraculously intact. Another man finds an unbroken keg of lamp oil. Each discovery is celebrated with claps on the back, a reminder that the river's appetite isn't absolute. As the sun climbs higher, the work becomes methodical. Planks are sorted into piles, salvageable, firewood, lost, nets are strung between posts to dry. You join in, tying knots where the lines have frayed, your hands moving automatically even as your mind drifts. In the quiet, your thoughts circle back to a story you heard once, from a sailor who claimed to have survived a hurricane at sea. He said the worst part wasn't the waves, or even the darkness. It is the way the wind would drop to nothing, leaving the ship suspended in a stillness so complete. It felt unnatural, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Sometimes you think that's what life here feels like, a waiting, a tension under the skin, knowing that calm is never a promise, only a pause. By noon, the fishermen break for a meal. You gather with them around a small fire built from driftwood. The smoke drifts lazily upward, carrying the scent of salt and charred fish. Someone passes you a cup of weak ale, and you drink gratefully, letting it warm the hollow ache in your belly. As you eat, the conversation shifts to tales of storms past. One man tells of the time the sea rose so high it swallowed the docks in a single night. Another claims he once saw lightning split a ship from mast to keel, leaving nothing but a scatter of charred planks. You recognize the edge in their voices, how every retelling is part warning, part exorcism, as if by naming their disasters, they can keep them from returning. A woman, her hair tied back in a red kerchief, shares a story you haven't heard before. She says that in the old days, sailors believed there were creatures beneath the waves, beings who stirred the waters out of envy or boredom. That's why we toss coins into the river, she says, a little tribute, so they'll look kindly on us. Historians still argue whether such offerings were superstition or a practical attempt to soothe the mind. But as she speaks, you feel a shiver that has nothing to do with the wind. When the meal is done, you stand, stretching the stiffness from your back. Around you, the fishermen begin to rise as well. The fire gutters out. The nets are hoisted onto shoulders. No one lingers. There is too much to be done. You follow Roderick back toward the village, your boots squelching in the damp grass. As you pass the first cottages, you see that the rebuilding has spread here too. Women scrub the walls with brine to kill the mildew. Children sort firewood into neat stacks. The air is filled with the smell of smoke and fresh mud. You find yourself thinking about the ships that never returned, the sailors who vanished without a trace, the families left behind to wonder if the sea swallowed them whole or merely carried them beyond reach. In a place like this, absence is almost as familiar as presence, and yet, for all the fear the river brings, you know it also sustains you. Without its trade routes, its fish, its fertile banks, your village would be little more than a scatter of huts in the forest. That perhaps is the hardest truth to swallow. You must love what can destroy you, and you must never forget that it does not love you back. As dusk draws near, you help Roderick drag his skiff into the shelter of a half-collapsed boathouse. It will need weeks of work before it floats again, but it is still more than some have. He clasps your shoulder, his grip firm, and you feel a shared understanding pass between you, an unspoken agreement that this too will be survived. You part ways as twilight settles over the river. For a moment, you stand alone on the bank, watching the last light glint on the water's surface. It looks peaceful, beautiful, even. You know better than to trust it. When you finally turn for home, your steps are slow but steady. Each footfall feels like a small act of faith that the path will hold, that the storm will stay away a little longer, that you will have the strength to rise again when it does not. And as you close your door behind you, you whisper a simple promise into the darkness, that no matter how many times the flood comes, you will be here to meet it. Morning returns not with sunshine, but with a low, sullen drizzle that seeps into your bones. You wake stiff and sore from yesterday's labor, every muscle complaining as you pull yourself upright. Your hands look older than they did a week ago, Scraped raw, the skin cracked where the cold has never fully left. But you flex your fingers until they loosen, then stand because there is no room for idleness. Outside, the air tastes of damp ash from the dozens of small fires still burning across the village. Families are drying whatever they can. Clothes, bundles of reed, precious bits of parchment. You step into the lane, boots sinking half an inch into the churned mire, and begin the walk toward the far side of the settlement. There is work to be done on the bridge, and your turn to help has come. The bridge was never grand, just a wooden span over the narrowest bend of the river. In ordinary times it was enough, but the floodwaters smashed entire sections of railing and carried away half the planks. Now it sits in ruin, a splintered arch that ends abruptly in air. On the far side, a few stranded carts still perch on the approach, their wheels caked with mud. A pair of goats stand atop one, as though this is all some peculiar game. Their bleating follows you as you approach the working party. You join a cluster of men and women in the grass near the bridgehead. Someone hands you a hammer and a fistful of long iron nails. The air is full of purposeful clatter, voices calling measurements, the creak and groan of timbers being pried loose, the steady ring of hammers striking home. You can almost forget for a moment that all this urgency is born of calamity. Someone sets a plank across the gap, and you climb out to hold it steady while it's pinned into place. From here you can see the river's slow current dragging branches and bits of thatch downstream. You remember the storm at its height, the way the water roared so low you couldn't hear your own heartbeat. In this sullen drizzle, it seems impossible that the same river could be capable of such violence. But you know better. You keep one eye on the flow as you work, wary of any sudden surge. Everyone does. You've all learned that danger comes as easily in silence as in fury. The carpenter's son is the one giving directions. He is barely 20, with hair that falls into his eyes, and a voice gone hoarse from shouting over the wind. But he moves with confidence, measuring each board twice, his hands steady even when his face is drawn with fatigue. You wonder if he ever imagined he'd be in charge of saving the only way across the river. It doesn't matter. No one else has his skill, and so everyone follows his lead. Hour by hour, the bridge begins to knit itself back together. The work is slow, as all good work is, but by afternoon you can walk halfway across without feeling the planks shudder beneath you. Each nail you drive feels like a small victory, a way of saying, "We are still here." You pause to straighten your back, stretching the ache from your shoulders, and watch the other side of the river. Beyond the damaged carts, you can see the fields that belong to the wealthier farmers. They look as ruined as your own, rows of flattened grain, fences folded over like paper. The Lord's steward stands near the edge of the road, arms folded, his fine cloak muddy to the knees. You can't hear his words, but you see the way he gestures, sharp, impatient. Even now, some believe that shouting can coax the world back to order. You glance back at your neighbours, all bent over their work, and feel a quiet gratitude. Here there is no pretense that command alone can rebuild what the flood has taken. Only hands, blistered, cold, stubborn, can do that. Later, as the drizzle thickens to proper rain, the carpenter's son calls for a halt. You set down your hammer and follow the others toward the trees, where someone has rigged a rough awning of oiled cloth. Beneath it, the air is smoky with the scent of damp wool and sweat. You sit close together, knees touching, sharing what little warmth you can. Someone passes around a heel of bread, a strip of dried venison. You take your share without comment. Conversation is sparse. You are all too tired for much talk, but there is comfort in the silence, an understanding that words are not always necessary. The rain drums on the canvas above your head, and you let your eyes close for a moment. Just a moment, you tell yourself, but in the darkness behind your lids, you see again the river as it was 3 nights ago, rising in the dark, roaring through the streets. You feel again the cold surge around your knees, the moment your footing gave way. The memory is so vivid you flint. When you open your eyes, the carpenter's son is watching you. He says nothing, only gives a nod that says he understands. He saw it too. You exhale, and the tremor in your chest eases. As the rain tapers off, you return to the bridge. The afternoon passes in the same steady rhythm. Measure, lift, nail, repeat. You work until your arms are trembling and your vision swims. But when you step back at last, the progress is undeniable. 2/3 of the bridge stands whole again. The path across the water has begun to return. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. How medieval masons and carpenters were sometimes among the most respected tradesmen in a town, their knowledge of timber and stone prized as much as any noble title. Watching the carpenter's son, you understand why. In times like these, skill is worth more than any coin. The last of the daylight fades as you gather the tools and stack them under the awning. You stand for a moment on the edge of the repaired section, watching the dark river slip beneath you. For all your labor, you know the next storm could tear it away again, but that is not reason to stop. If anything, it's reason to keep building. As you turn to leave, you hear laughter drifting over the water. You look back and see a pair of children on the far bank, trying to herd the goats down from the abandoned cart. They shriek every time a goat shifts its weight, and the sound is so absurd you can't help but laugh too, even now, especially now. Life insists on its small, ridiculous joys. You walk home in the dark, the mud sucking at your boots. The village is quiet, the hush that follows hard work and harder losses. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling into the damp air. In doorways, lanterns glow behind shutters patched with cloth. You pause outside your own threshold, hand on the latch, and look back at the river one last time. You remember a fringe tidbit you once heard, that some fishermen believed the river had moods, a kind of slow intelligence that could be placated or angered. Never speak ill of it, an old woman once told you. Tonight you find yourself nodding to the dark water, offering the smallest sign of respect. Whether or not it matters, it feels right. Inside, the air is warmer than you expected. Someone has left a basket by your hearth. Half a loaf of rye bread, a lump of butter, a sprig of rosemary tied with twine. You stand over it for a moment, throat tight. Then you kneel and you eat. It tastes like everything you've been working toward. Survival, yes, but also something gentler, something that might one day become peace. The night stretches long and quiet around you. Outside, the rain returns, tapping gently on the roof as if testing its strength. You close your eyes and breathe in the smell of bread and wood smoke. And for the first time in days, you let yourself believe that tomorrow will come. And when it does, you will be ready. When dawn unfurls across the village, you are already on your feet, hands pressed against the doorframe, as if steadying yourself against the morning. You are not alone in rising early. All around you, the settlement rouses like something waking from a troubled sleep. Carts creak over the half-dried mud. Voices murmur in low, rusp tones. Even the birds are subdued, hopping along the broken fences with quick, nervous movements, as if they remember the water too. You step out into the chill and lift your eyes to the sky. Clouds linger there, pale, indifferent, and you wonder how long the reprieve will last. The river, though lower, still glimmers with a menace you can feel in your teeth. It is a living thing that no one dares to trust. Not entirely. Today your work lies among the ruins. You walk past the chapel, where candles still burn in each window, and down the narrow track that leads to the outskirts of the village. Here the destruction is quieter, but no less thorough. Homes stand hollow-eyed, doors unlatched or missing, roofs sagging in the middle. The flood has left behind a brittle silence, as if even the air has forgotten how to belong here. When you reach the farthest cottage, you stop. It was once the home of a weaver named Theda, an elderly woman with a back bent like a bow and a voice that could soothe even the fiercest child. She has been taken in by neighbours, but her house stands empty, the walls stained dark halfway to the eaves. You lift the latch and step inside. The air is close with the smell of mildew and wet thatch. You pick your way across the floor, careful where the planks have warped. In the corner, a loom leans at an angle. threads sagging where the water loosened them from their pegs. You stand beside it, touching the damp yarn with the tips of your fingers, and wonder how many years it took her to learn this skill, how many mornings she spent at this very spot with her hands moving in steady rhythm. It strikes you then that this is the second work you must do beyond saving grain or mending fences. You must bear witness. You must remember what stood here, so that when the day comes to rebuild, nothing is truly lost. So you begin. You gather what can be salvaged bundles of yarn, not entirely spoiled, the wooden comb for carding fleece, a few tools scattered on a shelf. You set them outside on a plank to dry, arranging them as carefully as if they were relics. Each piece is a fragment of a life, a promise that this cottage will not simply dissolve into memory. Across the lane, others are doing the same. You see neighbours moving among the ruined houses, lifting chairs and baskets and blankets into the light. No one speaks much. The work is its own language. By midday, a kind of order has emerged. Salvaged goods line the verges in neat rows. Some will be cleaned and returned to use. Some will become firewood, but all of it, you realize, is proof that the village still breathes. As you straighten from placing a bundle of yarn, you see a pair of children crouched near a broken wall. They are picking through a drift of silt that has settled like an unwelcome quilt over the hearthstones. The boy, no more than 6, exclaims in triumph as he uncovers a wooden spoon. His sister beams, as if he has unearthed treasure. Watching them, you feel something loosen in your chest. Even in ruins, there is discovery. You cross the lane to help, kneeling in the damp earth beside them. Together you uncover a handful of small objects, a cup, a woolen cap, a fragment of pottery glazed in blue. You set them on a board, brushing away the mud with your palm. The children watch, solemn now, understanding that these things matter because they have survived. Their mother calls them away before long. They run, waving over their shoulders, and you are left alone with your small hoard of rediscovered belongings. You take a moment to study them, ordinary things, yet more precious now than gold. When you finally stand, you feel steadier, as if the act of salvaging has stitched something back together in you as well. In the afternoon, you join a group at the edge of the fields, where the land dips low into a wide hollow. Here the water pooled deepest. You have heard the stories of what was lost, cabbage beds flattened into brown sludge, beehives washed away, potato mounds turned to sour paste. But no story prepares you for the site itself. The hollow is a kind of graveyard. Tangled stalks lie crisscrossed over the ground, pressed flat as if by a giant hand. A wooden plough juts at an angle from the mire. 2 crows pick at something unidentifiable near the fence line. You swallow, tasting bitterness. Still, the others are already at work. Spades sink into the muck, turning it to expose fresher earth below. You join them, setting your shoulder to the task. The mud is heavy, clinging to the blade in wet clods, but you keep digging, driven by the same quiet need you saw in the children, to find something worth saving. As you labor, an old man nearby tells a story. He remembers another flood, years past, when his own fields were swallowed. He says it was weeks before he dared plant again, and when he did, the cabbages grew larger than he had ever seen. Must have been something in the silt, he says, though his voice holds no certainty. Or maybe it was just a sign that nothing's ever truly finished. Historians still argue whether medieval farmers understood that floods sometimes brought new fertility, replenishing the soil with nutrients. But standing here, spade in hand, you don't care about the debates. You only care that the old man's cabbages came back, and that yours might too. You pause to catch your breath, wiping sweat from your forehead with the back of your wrist. The drizzle has finally ceased, leaving the air cool and still. Around you, the other workers move in a slow choreography, digging, lifting, piling debris at the field's edge. No one complains. Complaints are a luxury none of you can afford. At dusk you gather what you have cleared and carry it to the edge of the hollow. The heap of broken stalks and sodden straw stands as tall as your shoulder. You will burn it tomorrow, when the wind is right. For now, You let it be, a testament to a day's work well spent. As you make your way home, you pass the place where the bridge stands newly mended. Someone has set a sprig of holly at the highest point, tied with a scrap of red cloth. It flutters in the breeze, a bright, defiant banner. You smile, though your lips feel cracked and strange. Superstition or no, the gesture feels right. At your threshold, you pause to look back once more. The fields are dark now, but you can still see the shapes of your neighbors moving among them, lanterns bobbing like fireflies. You are struck by a sudden fierce love for this place, for these people who refuse to surrender to the river's hunger. Inside, the air smells of damp earth and the last embers of the hearth. You kneel to stir them back to life, coaxing a tiny flame from the ash. As the fire grows, you hold your hands over it, feeling the heat sink into your skin. In the quiet, you remember a saying you once heard from a passing monk: "We are never closer to grace than when we build from nothing." You think perhaps that he was right, because as tired as you are, as hollowed by loss as you feel, you have never been more certain of your place in the world. You are a builder, a bearer of witness, a gatherer of what remains, and tomorrow, when the sun rises, you will begin again. The morning is soft with a low fog that drifts through the village, like a hesitant visitor. You wake in the grey quiet, feeling the damp in your bones before you even swing your legs over the side of the pallet. Your body aches in that dull, thorough way that comes after too many days of heavy labour, but there's no time to nurse it. The work of surviving doesn't leave room for indulgence. Today, though, the labour will be of a different kind, because in the lull that has come after the storm, when the river no longer claws at the thresholds and the fields no longer look like inland seas, something stranger has begun to take root in the minds of your neighbours. You hear it in the hush of their voices as you pass, this new belief that the floodwater itself holds a power beyond destruction. You might think, in the modern world, that superstition is an old-fashioned crutch, but here, where your life has been stripped to essentials, you can feel how easily the line blurs between rational caution and magical thinking. You sense it even before you reach the common green where a small gathering has formed. Word has spread that the healer, an old woman known more formally as the herb wife, though everyone simply calls her Editha, has found something remarkable among the wreckage. You stand a little apart at first, watching the circle tighten around her. She sits on a stool made of 2 crates lashed together, a shallow basin in her lap. The water inside is cloudy, flecked with tiny bits of leaf and straw. She lifts it carefully, so all can see. A hush spreads outward, like ripples in a pond. "This," she announces, "is water drawn from the river last night. It has passed through fields and gardens, carried the breath of living things, and the hand of God's test." A few heads nod solemnly. Someone crosses themselves. "It is not ordinary," she goes on. "If you wash your hands in it, it will cleanse more than mud and sickness. It will remind you that what the flood took, it also left behind." Her voice is steady, but you hear something under it, a note of hope she wants badly to believe herself. You glance around and see that you are not alone in your skepticism. There are other faces, furrowed with doubt, but there is also an openness in the way people lean forward, the way they press closer to the basin. After all, when disaster has washed away every certainty, why shouldn't a little magic be possible? A young mother steps up first. Her child clings to her skirts, thumb in his mouth. Editha beckons her to dip her hands. The woman hesitates, then does as she's told. When she stands back, her eyes are shining. Whether it's from belief or relief, you can't tell. One by one, others come forward. You stay where you are, arms folded. You don't mock them, far from it, but you feel the line in yourself, the place beyond which you cannot pretend to see miracles in muddy water. Still, you can't help but remember other times you have watched Editha work, how her hands have drawn fever away from a sick child, how her teas have eased the ache in your mother's joints. Perhaps the power is not in the water, but in the faith you pour into it. When the last villager has stepped back, Editha lifts the basin higher. "I will leave this here," she says simply. "If you doubt, no harm will come. If you believe, perhaps something good will follow." Then she sets the basin at the foot of the old oak that marks the green's boundary and walks away without another word. For a time, no one moves. The crowd lingers in small knots of conversation. You hear fragments drifting past. "It can't hurt," someone murmurs. "Stranger things have happened," another replies. "And maybe that's true." You think of all you've seen in the past week, the river swallowing whole wagons, the sky ripped open with lightning so bright it turned midnight into dawn. Against such power, the idea that floodwater might carry blessings seems no more impossible than anything else. But when you finally step closer, it is not to dip your hands, it is only to look. In the basin, the water is still cloudy, bits of grass swirling in slow circles. You crouch, studying your own reflection. It wavers, fragmented by the silt. You are reminded, suddenly, the way life itself feels just now blurred, unsteady, waiting to clear. A small cough startles you. You look up to see Githa standing a few paces away. Her hair is pinned back in its usual severe knot, but there is a softness in her expression that surprises you. "Not your kind of remedy?" she asks lightly. You shake your head. "No," you admit, "but I won't begrudge anyone else their comfort." "Wise," she says. Then after a pause, comfort comes in many shapes. She leaves you to your thoughts. After a moment, you rise and turn away from the basin. The rest of the day passes in quieter work. You join a party walking the fields, checking the state of the dikes and banks. In some places, the water has carved deep channels, exposing roots that look like bones in the dark soil. You mark each breach with a scrap of cloth tied to a stake, a grim inventory of all that must be repaired before the next rains come. When you stop to rest at midday, you sit in the lee of a fallen wall, sharing a heel of bread with an older man whose name you still don't know. The two of you don't speak. You are united only by weariness and the knowledge that no one else will mend these dikes for you. After the meal, you walk the edges of the fields alone, your thoughts drifting. You remember the harvest festival only a few months past. Tables laden with loaves and cider, children running between sheaves of barley stacked high as a man's shoulders. It feels impossibly far away now, as if it happened in another lifetime. Yet as you pass a half-flattened orchard, you see something that catches in your chest. A single apple clings to a branch that should have been stripped clean. It is bruised, lopsided, but whole. Without thinking, you reach up and pluck it. The skin is cold under your thumb. You turn it over in your palm, and for a moment, you feel something you haven't let yourself feel since the storm began, an almost painful surge of gratitude. You tuck the apple into your pocket and move on. By late afternoon, the wind has picked up, teasing at the scraps of cloth you've left to mark the damage. You retrace your steps, counting them to be sure you've missed nothing. 6 breaches, each one large enough to drown a field if another flood comes. You know there are more, hidden under the churned earth. The knowledge sits heavy in your gut. When you return to the village, the basin is still there under the oak, though the crowd has long since drifted away. You stop again, studying it from a distance. The water is lower now, evaporated by the sun, but it still holds its soft swirl of silt. You think of Editha's words that the floodwater carried the breath of living things, and you think, too, of how much you have come to respect anything that endures. You do not step forward, you do not dip your hands, but you incline your head in a silent acknowledgement before turning toward home. In your doorway, you pause with your hand on the latch. You look back once more at the fields, the broken fences, the half-mended bridge. There is so much still to do, so much that may never be the same. But when you close your eyes, you see that apple again, stubborn on its branch, waiting to be found. You think that perhaps for now that is enough, before dawn has even thought about breaking. You are awake, your breath a pale cloud in the dark. The old ache is in your shoulders again, but you have come to expect it. A small price for all the hours spent hauling, stacking, mending, You roll to your side and feel the lump in your pocket. The apple you carried home yesterday rests there still, bruised but intact. You leave it where it is, a quiet reminder that not everything is swept away. When you step outside, you find the village hushed under a sky of shifting ink. Low clouds press against the rooftops, as if trying to smother whatever stubborn hope remains. But you can smell no rain yet, and that small mercy lets you exhale. Today you are bound for the northern edge of the settlement, where the old road disappears into the trees. You have heard talk, whispers, really, that certain families plan to hold a gathering there, just beyond the last homestead, where the land rises into a long, slow hill. No one has said it aloud, but you suspect the reason, the old beliefs, the ones people pretend to forget when times are good. You are not the only one drawn to the outskirts. As you walk, you see figures moving through the dawn, some with heads bowed as though ashamed, some striding with purpose. You join their silent procession without comment. No one meets your eye. You are all here for the same reason, and that is enough. By the time you reach the hilltop, a small crowd has gathered. The grass is matted with recent rain, and footprints have churned the soil to a slick paste. At the center of the clearing stands a rough circle of stones, black with age and lichen. You know this place. Everyone does. Once, long before the church bell first rang in your village, the people came here to ask favors of whatever powers they believed ruled the sky and the earth. In recent years, the circle has been left mostly alone, visited only by curious children or old women collecting herbs. But disaster changes everything. When the fields lie flattened and the river has stolen more than it gave, even the devout find themselves wondering what else might be listening. You take your place at the edge of the gathering, pulling your cloak tight against the cold. The air feels charged, as though the hill itself is holding its breath. A woman steps forward, her hair loose about her shoulders, her skirts hemmed in mud. In her hands is a bundle wrapped in white linen. She kneels beside the largest of the stones and sets the bundle down as gently as if it were a sleeping child. No one speaks. When she stands, her voice is soft but sure. "This land has fed us," she says, "and the river has given us water, but both have also taken. We are here to remember what was lost, and to ask that the taking be finished." Her gaze lifts, searching the circle, as if to find approval. In the flickering torchlight, you see her face drawn, hollow but alight with something fierce. Perhaps desperation can look like faith, if you stand far enough away. One by one, others come forward. They lay offerings at the base of the stones, a twist of rye bread, a sprig of rosemary, a wooden carving of a fish. Each gift is modest, but together they form a testament to what little you all still possess, and what you are willing to risk in hopes of protection. You feel a tug of unease. You have prayed in the chapel, knelt on the cold flagstones while the priest intoned Latin blessings. But here, the prayers are older, spoken in the plain words of your own tongue. Here, no one pretends the river is merely a hazard to be managed. It is a presence, unpredictable, hungry, and maybe, just maybe, responsive. Historians still argue whether the villagers of the Middle Ages ever truly left behind the old pagan gods. Some claim that beneath the veneer of Christian ritual, there remained a hidden reverence for the spirits of hill and stream. Watching your neighbors now, you think perhaps the truth is simpler. When life has ground you into the earth, you will reach for any hand that might lift you out. You do not step forward. You have no offering to give that feels worthy, but you bow your head with the rest when the woman lifts her palms, her voice rising into the raw morning air. "Let the river sleep," she calls. "Let the land mend. Let no child go hungry for what has passed." The words echo out into the trees. You wait, listening for any answer, though you know there will be none. Still, when you look up, the clouds have thinned, and a pale strip of dawn glows along the horizon. You feel something ease in your chest, whether faith or simple relief. You cannot say. Slowly, the gathering begins to dissolve. People drift away in pairs and threes, heads bent in quiet conversation. Some look ashamed of their presence here, Others seem almost defiant, as though daring anyone to question their hope. You turn and follow the path back toward the village. Your boots sink into the churned earth, each step a quiet act of commitment. No matter what power, divine or otherwise, rules the water, you will face it on your feet. At the crossroads you pause. The river glimmers through the trees, dull and brown, but deceptively calm. You remember the night it rose over its banks, the way it swallowed fences and firewood without a sound. You remember, too, the hours you spent, trying to hold it back with nothing but planks and determination. You wonder if the river remembers you in return. In the daylight it seems almost gentle. You know better than to believe that. When you reach the green, you find the basin Edith left still in place beneath the old oak. The water has settled to a thin scum of silt. You see that someone has left a single feather floating on its surface, a gull's feather, pale as milk. You don't touch it. Instead, you lift the basin in both hands and carry it to the edge of the square. There, you tip it slowly into the earth. The water soaks into the mud without fanfare. The ritual is finished. You set the empty basin down and stand a moment, feeling the weight of your exhaustion. Then you draw a breath, square your shoulders, and walk on. The rest of the morning is filled with smaller labours. You help Githa mend the roof of the henhouse. You stack firewood with the blacksmith's apprentice. You collect the scattered twigs and scraps that the children have overlooked in their tidy piles. Each act is a declaration that you will not be cowed, that you will not yield everything you are to the memory of a single storm. As afternoon deepens, you pause to eat a scrap of bread. The apple is still in your pocket, and you hold it in your palm as you chew. You think of the woman on the hill, her voice lifted in a plea older than any priest's blessing. You think of the river, sullen in its banks, and you think too of the villagers around you, people who have chosen to keep building, even when the sky seems determined to tear down whatever they make. Perhaps that is the true power here, not the charm of old stones, nor the water in a basin, but the simple, repeated decision to endure. When dusk comes, you gather your tools and walk home by the last light. The sky is a bruised violet, the air heavy with the promise of frost. You pause by the chapel door, where the priest has set a lantern to burn through the night. Inside you can see the shapes of people kneeling, their heads bowed. You do not join them, not tonight. Instead you stand alone on the threshold, your breath clouding the cold glass. In the silence, you close your eyes and offer up your own quiet prayer, not to any god in particular, but to the land itself, to the river, to whatever has kept you alive this long. When you open your eyes again, you feel steadier. You turn toward your small house, one hand resting over the apple in your pocket, a reminder that even in ruin, something sweet can remain. And as you cross the threshold, you whisper, more to yourself than to any listening ear, let tomorrow be kinder. Dawn has barely begun to lift the darkness when you hear the first rumours. You are standing over the embers of your hearth, coaxing a thin flame into life, when a knock comes at the door. Sharp, urgent, the kind that never brings good news. You open it to find a neighbour you barely know, her cloak pulled tight around her thin shoulders, her face pale beneath the soot and weariness. The saying it was witches, she blurts without preamble. Her eyes dart past you into the house, as though she half expects to see a black cat or a cauldron simmering in the shadows. They say that's why the storm came. You are so tired, so hollowed out by days of labour and loss, that it takes you a moment to understand. Then you feel it, the old fear, stirring like an ember you thought had burned itself out. Witchcraft, heresy, the need to blame someone whose suffering would ease no hunger and mend no roof but might, for a little while, give shape to all this senseless ruin. You tell her you haven't heard any such thing. You keep your voice as gentle as you can, though you see no comfort in her eyes. She only nods once, jerkily, and turns away down the path, her boots leaving shallow prints in the cold mud. You close the door and lean your forehead against the wood. For a long moment, you stand like that, trying to breathe past the sickness rising in your chest, because you know how quickly these stories can spread, How easily a village that has stood shoulder to shoulder in disaster can fracture when fear takes root. By the time you make your way into the square, the hush of early morning has been replaced by a kind of brittle, watchful quiet. People stand in small knots, their voices low but charged. You catch fragments as you pass, lights seen in the woods, near the old stones, the healer's charms. Everyone knows she keeps them hidden. A curse. That's what it was. A curse on the fields. You want to shout at them, to shake them all by the shoulders and remind them that the river flooded because it has always flooded, because the earth cares nothing for your piety or your fear. But you keep your mouth shut, because you also know that desperation will not be argued away by reason. Near the chapel, the priest stands in quiet conversation with the steward. His face is grave, his hands folded into the wide sleeves of his robe. When he looks up, your eyes meet. You search his expression for some sign, condemnation or reassurance, but find neither, only the same bone-deep weariness. You carry yourself. You keep walking. There is work to do, and it will not wait for the village to decide whom to blame. At the edge of the green, you find Editha sitting on a low stool, sorting bundles of dried herbs into neat piles. Her hands move deftly, but her eyes are fixed on the middle distance. You hesitate before approaching, unsure whether your presence will help or only remind her of what she must already know. In the end, you sit beside her without a word. For a time, you both pretend you are only neighbours, tending to the ordinary work of a morning. Then she sighs, so softly you almost miss it, and says, "They will come here next." You swallow. You don't know that. She looks at you, and there is no fear in her face, only a weary kind of clarity. Of course I do. You want to tell her they will listen to sense, that they will remember every child she has cured, every wound she has bound. But the words feel thin in your mouth, insubstantial as smoke. "Let them talk," she says after a moment. "When they are ready to work again, the work will still be waiting." She picks up another bundle and begins to tie it with twine. You sit with her until your hands remember what to do, reaching for stalks of yarrow, lavender, comfrey. There is something almost holy in this small defiance. Two people carrying on as though the world is still ordinary. By midday, the square is more crowded than you've seen it since the floodwaters began to recede. Someone has lit a brazier near the chapel steps, and the smoke curls up into the grey sky in thin, uneasy spirals. You see faces there you don't recognize, men and women from the outlying farms, drawn by the same dark curiosity that keeps your neighbours lingering instead of turning back to their chores. At the edge of the crowd, you spot the woman who knocked on your door at dawn. She stands with her arms folded tight across her chest, her gaze fixed on the brazier. When your eyes meet, she looks away. The priest steps forward. He raises his hands for silence. The hush that falls is complete, brittle as a late frost. "My friends," he begins, and his voice is calm, measured. "We have all suffered. We have lost much. And when we suffer, it is natural to look for a reason. You wait for what will follow, your heart thudding dully in your throat. But," he goes on, "we must remember that the river rises and falls according to laws we do not always understand, that God's will is not always ours to know." A murmur ripples through the crowd, relief in some voices, protest in others. The priest lifts his chin. There is no evidence of witchcraft here, no proof of curses or heresies, only the misfortune of a storm and the labour of rebuilding. Somewhere near the front, a man shouts, "And the lights in the woods? The charms buried in the fields?" "The lights were torches," the priest replies evenly, "carried by those who sought higher ground. The charms are herbs, meant to heal." He pauses, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "You are tired, you are frightened. But if you let fear rule you now, you will lose more than you already have." For a long moment, no one speaks. Then the woman beside the brazier lowers her eyes. A few others turn away, their shoulders slumping, as if some tension has drained out of them. But not everyone is satisfied. As you watch, the steward steps forward, his mouth set in a thin line. And if more floods come, he demands, if the fields fail again, then we will face it together, the priest says quietly. Without tearing each other apart, the steward hesitates, as though weighing whether to argue further, but at last he steps back. The brazier continues to smoke, sending its thin plume into the grey sky. Slowly the crowd begins to disperse. You feel something in your chest unclench, though you know it is not over. Fear does not vanish in a single morning. It only waits for another chance to bloom. You walk back to Edith's house and find her still sitting on her stool, her bundles of herbs arrayed neatly at her feet. When she looks up, you shake your head. For now, you say simply. She nods, and you feel the smallest flicker of relief. You pick up another bundle and begin to sort. The rest of the day passes in a quiet rhythm. You mend a section of fence that the river knocked flat. You help Githa gather firewood from the edge of the forest. You share a meal of thin broth and rye bread with the blacksmith's apprentice, neither of you speaking more than a handful of words. As dusk falls, you stand at the edge of the river, watching the water slip past in slow, indifferent currents. You remember the priest's words that the river follows laws no one fully understands. You wonder whether that is any different from faith, in the end, trusting in something you cannot see, even when it has hurt you. When you turn back toward your house, you feel the weight of the day settle over your shoulders, but you also feel the stubborn, quiet resolve that has carried you this far. You will not give it up now, and as you step inside, you think that perhaps the greatest act of defiance is simply to keep living, to keep tending your small fire against the dark. The sun rises behind a bank of pewter clouds, pale and thin as a dying candle flame. You are already awake, though you hardly remember lying down. These days, sleep comes in fits, short stretches where your mind finally lets go, only to startle awake again as though afraid to drift too far. You stand at your doorway for a long moment, breathing the cold morning air. Even now, even after all you have endured, it still smells like home, damp earth, wet wood, the faint sweetness of the last rotting apples. You step into the lane and find the village caught between two moods. Some have begun to build in earnest, mending fences, resetting stones, turning over soil. Others stand idle, as though uncertain whether they should begin again or wait for another blow to fall. You understand both instincts. Your heart wants to believe this season of hardship is passing, but your bones remember every hour you spent watching the river rise. Hope is a fragile thing here, always a little out of reach. At the edge of the green you pause. A group of men stand together, their voices low, their faces turned toward the river. As you draw closer, you recognize the carpenter's son, the blacksmith, two of the farmers whose fields were worst hit, and the steward, his arms folded across his chest, jaw set hard. They are arguing, though in the restrained way men argue when they are too tired to shout. Have to prepare, the steward is saying, his voice clipped. If it happens again, and if it doesn't, the carpenter's son interrupts. He sounds weary, but unyielding. We can't spend every waking hour expecting disaster. You'd rather be caught unready. I'd rather plant before it is too late. The blacksmith glances up as you approach. He nods in greeting, but there is no welcome in his eyes, only the same hollow frustration you feel in your own chest. You join the small circle without asking permission. No one protests. These days, everyone's opinion feels equally necessary and equally futile. One of the farmers rubs a hand over his face. We can't keep waiting, he says. The seed won't hold much longer. It's damp already. If we don't get it into the ground, it will rot, you finish for him. A silence follows. You all know the truth of it. The sacks of seed grain salvaged from the flood have sat in barns and cellars, growing heavier with moisture. Every day you wait. You risk losing what little chance remains to coax a harvest from the ruined fields. But still, there is the river. Its surface gleams sullenly in the half-light, as though it has not yet decided whether to grant you peace or to rise again. The steward shifts his weight. If the dikes fail, they'll fail whether we plant or not, says the carpenter's son. You meet the steward's eyes. For a moment, you see in them the same fear that has kept you awake at night, the knowledge that you can make all the preparations you like and still lose everything in a single hour. Historians still argue whether medieval communities learned from these disasters, whether each flood and famine taught them better ways to build, to plan, to store grain. You wonder if the scholars realize how little space there is for innovation when your belly is hollow and your roof is patched with borrowed thatch. At last, the blacksmith clears his throat. "I say we plant," he says simply. "If the river comes again, we'll meet it then. But this," he gestures to the sodden sacks in the back of a wagon, "this we can still do." A few heads nod, slowly. The carpenter's son looks relieved, though his shoulders remain tense. The steward's mouth tightens, but he doesn't argue further. And that, you realize, is as close to agreement as you are likely to come. The meeting breaks apart without ceremony. Men drift away in pairs, already murmuring plans for dividing the fields, assigning work, mending ploughs. You stand for a moment longer, watching the wagon where the seed grain waits. In the grey light it looks almost luminous, an offering, a challenge, a promise you're not sure you can keep. You draw a slow breath and turn away. If planting is to be done, there is little time to waste. You spend the rest of the morning in the fields, with mud clinging to your boots and the cold seeping through the thin soles. You work beside the blacksmith's apprentice, your hands moving in the same steady rhythm: dig, drop, cover, move on. The damp soil yields reluctantly. In some places, it is so waterlogged you have to kneel to scoop it aside. But you keep going, because there is nothing else. Each seed is a quiet hope you bury in the earth, trying not to think too much about whether it will ever sprout. At midday, you pause to drink from a gourd. The apprentice sinks down beside you, his face flushed. For a while, you sit in companionable silence. Then he says, almost too softly to hear, "Do you think it will hold?" You don't pretend not to understand. You look out across the field, rows of turned earth stretching into the distance, the river glinting beyond the hedgerow, and you say the only honest thing you can, "I don't know." He nods, as though that is answer enough. After the meal, you return to work. The day wears on, hour after hour, until your body feels like an empty husk driven by sheer will. You have not felt so tired since the night the flood first came, but even in your exhaustion, you cannot stop. Not when you think of what will happen if the seed is lost, if no harvest comes. Hunger is patient. It waits behind every door. By dusk, the last row is finished. You stand, rubbing your aching back, and look over what you have done. In the fading light, the furrows are dark as scars, but they are ready. That at least is something. As you shoulder your tools and make your way home, you pass the chapel. The priest stands in the doorway, speaking to a small cluster of villagers. You catch only a few words. Trust in providence. Faith will sustain us, but you do not slow. Faith, you think, is fine for those with the luxury of it. The rest of you have mud under your nails and hope buried in the ground. When you reach your threshold, you find a small bundle tied with string. Someone has left you a wedge of cheese and a handful of dried herbs. You close your eyes for a moment, gratitude and sorrow mingling in your chest. Then you pick it up and carry it inside. The fire is burned low. You set your tools by the hearth and sink onto the stool, cradling the bundle in your lap. You think of the steward's pinched face, the blacksmith's quiet certainty, the way the river watched you all as you argued over your own survival. You wonder, not for the first time, if you are all simply stubborn fools who cannot accept when they have been beaten. But then you remember the feel of the seed in your palm, the way it slipped into the earth with the tiniest sound. A promise, even if it is a fragile one. You close your eyes and picture the fields in another season, green and thick with barley, the air warm, the river low and docile. You can almost believe in it, and as the last light fades, you whisper a small vow into the dark. If the river comes again, you will meet it. But until then, you will plant. You will build. You will endure. Because in the end, That is the only story you know how to tell. Morning comes pale and brittle, the sky a thin wash of colour behind the ragged roofs. You rise slowly, feeling the ache in your arms from yesterday's planting, the heaviness in your legs, but you do not linger. You dress in the same clothes you wore the day before, crusted with mud at the hem, and step outside. The air tastes clean today, cold but with a clarity that reminds you of early spring before the flood came. As you walk toward the green, you pass the fields where your seeds lie hidden. Rows of turned earth stretch away, dark and silent. You try not to think of them as graves. At the edge of the square you find the first stirrings of a new urgency. People have begun to speak of trade again, of the need to bring in salt, grain, timber for the houses that must be rebuilt before the next season. In ordinary times, merchants would already be arriving along the river roads with their wagons and bright-coloured tents. But the roads are half ruined, the bridges barely repaired, and the river itself remains sullen in its banks. You pause by the smithy, watching the blacksmith and his apprentice shape lengths of iron into crude nails. Even in times of disaster, you need nails. The sound of hammer on anvil rings out across the square, sharp and reassuring. You let it steady you for a moment before you move on. Beyond the well you see Githa and two other women standing beside a cart. The cart's single axle is cracked, and they are arguing over whether it can be repaired or whether it must be abandoned. You step closer, offering your shoulder to help lift one side so the crack can be bound with rope. The wood creaks ominously but holds, and the women exhale in relief. "Thank you," Githa says softly. Her face looks older than you remember. Grief does that, lays its hand on you in a way that never quite lifts. But there is still something unbowed in the set of her jaw. "It's nothing," you say, though you both know it is never nothing to keep something from breaking completely. You help them wheel the cart to the edge of the square, where other salvaged wagons stand in crooked lines. All around you, people are sorting, counting, mending, preparing for a journey no one quite trusts. The talk is full of questions. Will the merchants come? Can they be persuaded to trade if coin is scarce? What will happen if the river rises again before supplies arrive? Historians still argue whether medieval trade was ever truly reliable, whether even in good times the arrival of grain or salt could be counted upon. You suspect the scholars have never waited on a muddy road, scanning the horizon for wagons that do not come. By midday the sky has grown brighter, though the sun feels no warmer. You join a group tasked with clearing the last debris from the road that runs north to the larger market towns. What was once a rutted track is now a mess of driftwood, silt and broken fence posts. You work with a shovel and a length of rope, dragging aside anything that might block a cart's wheel. Your shoulders burn, but you do not stop. No one does. The hours pass in a rhythm of labour. Lift, haul, pile, move on. Now and then you hear laughter, thin, startled, as though it surprises the person it escapes from. You think of how easy it was to laugh before, how often you did it without noticing. You wonder if it will ever come that easily again. By late afternoon, the worst of the wreckage has been cleared. You stand with your hands braced on your knees, catching your breath. The road looks passable now. Just beyond the last curve you can see where it rises out of the floodplain, dry and rutted but whole. Someone sets a hand on your shoulder. You look up to see the carpenter's son. His face is red from exertion, but his eyes are calm. "If the merchants come," he says, "they'll see we haven't given up." You nod, though your throat feels tight. "If they come, they will," he says, with the kind of certainty you envy. They always do. You want to believe him. You want to believe that trade is a force as unstoppable as the river, something that will find its way here no matter how many bridges fall. But you have learned that nothing is promised. Still, when he claps you lightly on the back and moves on, you feel steadier. As dusk comes, you walk home along the newly cleared road. Your boots leave deep prints in the damp earth. You think of the carts that will follow, weighted with salt, flour, timber. You think of the hands that will lift those burdens down, the voices that will call greetings, The first small trade that will signal the end of this siege. You think, too, of what you have to offer in return. There is little coin left in the village, but there are cheeses drying in cellars, lengths of cloth saved from the flood, a few casks of ale that escaped ruin. You suspect that in the months to come, barter will be your currency, work traded for work, one small good exchanged for another. The thought does not trouble you. In truth, you prefer it. Coin feels thin, insubstantial, but the labor of your hands, this you can trust. At your threshold, you pause to look back. The road gleams in the last of the daylight, pale as a scar. Beyond it, the fields wait in their silent rows. You cannot see the seeds beneath the soil, but you feel their presence like a pulse, fragile, invisible, but alive. Inside, you set down your tools and light the fire. The flames catch quickly, filling the air with a welcome warmth. You sit close to the hearth, feeling the heat sink into your bones. For a little while you allow yourself to rest, but even in your stillness, your thoughts drift to the river. You remember how it looked when the storm first broke, the way it poured over the banks, heedless and hungry. You remember the cries in the dark, the scramble for higher ground, the moment you realized no one was coming to save you. You think too of the first morning after, how you walked out into a world remade by water, how you found your neighbors there already gathering tools, already speaking in the language of survival. It occurs to you, not for the first time, that this is what it means to belong to a place, to witness its fury and remain anyway, to know its dangers and still love it in some quiet, inexplicable way. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of damp earth. You close your eyes and imagine the merchants cresting the ridge at dawn, their wagons heavy with everything you lack. You imagine the first shouted greetings, the first measure of grain weighed into waiting hands. You know better than to count on it. But hope, you have learned, is a habit as much as a feeling, and tonight you choose to practice it. When you finally rise to bank the fire, you feel the smallest spark of something you almost don't recognize. Anticipation. Tomorrow will come. You will be here to meet it. Dawn comes grey again, the kind of dim light that never quite feels like morning. You wake with the familiar heaviness in your limbs, but also with something different, a taut expectancy you can't name. It isn't hope exactly, not yet, but it is something close, something you are almost afraid to touch, for fear it will vanish the moment you look it in the eye. You rise, pulling on your cloak, and step outside. The air is sharp with cold, carrying the smell of damp soil and charred wood. You walk toward the road without thinking, your boots finding their way along the ruts you helped clear. Ahead, others are already gathering in ones and twos, faces turned toward the curve in the track where it rises over the ridge. They are waiting, as you are, for the first sign that the merchants have come. No one speaks. You take your place among them, folding your arms against the chill. The silence is different from the hush that followed the flood, not stunned, but listening, a readiness shared in every quiet breath. Somewhere behind you, a child whispers, "Do you see them yet?" The question is met with a soft murmur. No, not yet, keep watching. Time stretches. The light grows no brighter. Your thoughts drift. You think of all you have seen in these weeks, how the river rose without warning, how it swallowed the fields and smashed the barns, how you dug and hauled and built and grieved, how you knelt in mud and wondered whether you had the strength to stand up again. You remember the old stories you heard as a child, when storms were still something distant, tales of floods sent by God to test his people, of sins washed clean in muddy torrents. Historians still argue whether those stories were meant to comfort or to frighten. You think they did both, because the truth is, you have never felt more afraid than when the river came, and you have never felt more certain of your place in the world than in the days that followed, when you and your neighbors did not wait for rescue but bent your backs to the work of saving each other. A low cry breaks the silence. You look up. At the far crest of the road, a shape has appeared, small at first, dark against the pale sky. Another follows, and another, You squint, your heart thudding against your ribs. Then you see it clearly. The first wagon, canvas draped over its bowed frame. The second rolling behind, wheels wobbling over the ruts. A murmur spreads through the crowd. Thin, incredulous laughter. A rustle like wind through dry grass. Someone exhales sharply as if they have been holding their breath for days. You feel it too. This loosening, this flood of relief that leaves you dizzy. The merchants have come. They have come. The wagons draw nearer. You can see the horses now, their flanks streaked with mud. The drivers sit hunched on the benches, their cloaks pulled tight. A third wagon follows, then a fourth, until the road is filled with a slow procession of everything you have waited for. Barrels of salt and sacks of grain, bales of wool and crates of nails, the quiet promise of survival carried in each creaking axle. The first wagon lurches to a stop. The driver climbs down, his face weathered, eyes rimmed red from the road. He looks at the assembled villagers, this hollow-eyed, unbowed gathering, and he nods. Long road, he says simply. But we heard. No one moves. Then the blacksmith steps forward, his voice rough. You came. Aye. The driver glances back at the wagons. We almost turned back when we saw the river, but it's said you folk don't scare easy. Thought we'd best see for ourselves. A ripple of laughter passes through the crowd. It is softer than you remember laughter sounding, but it is real. The steward steps forward to haggle, his voice brisk, already measuring debts and trades. But you do not follow. Instead, you stand a little apart, watching the wagons with a strange tenderness. You think of everything they represent. The chance to mend your roof before winter, to fill your belly when the stored grain runs out. A chance, however fragile, to begin again. You look around and see that others feel it too. Githa has pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes bright. The carpenter's son rests his hand on the nearest wheel, as if to prove it is real. Even Editha stands at the edge of the square, her face unreadable, but her shoulders eased of the tension that has held them so long. Slowly the work begins. Men and women move to help unload the wagons, forming lines to carry the crates and sacks to the storehouse. You take your place among them, feeling the familiar rhythm return to your body. Lift, pass, step, lift again. Each bundle you shoulder feels lighter than it should. You know this is only the beginning, that trade will not erase the scars left by the flood. You know that hunger and sickness and grief will still walk among you in the months ahead. But today, you have something more than fear. You have proof that the river could not wash everything away. Hours pass. The square fills with supplies. Voices rise, calling inventory, arguing over price, greeting old friends who have travelled with the caravans. You move among them as if in a waking dream. For the first time in weeks, you feel yourself smile without thinking. As dusk falls, the wagons are nearly empty. A small fire has been kindled near the well, its smoke curling into the quiet air. People gather close, sharing news of other towns, rumours of more storms upriver. But the talk is easier now, less a litany of disaster and more a weaving together of what remains. You sit on the low wall near the chapel, your hands resting on your knees. The firelight flickers over familiar faces, some gaunt, some bruised by loss, but all still here. You think of how close you came to despair, and how much it matters that you did not surrender to it. Beside you, the blacksmith lowers himself onto the wall with a groan. I thought we were done for, he admits, staring into the flames. So did I, you say. He chuckles, a rough sound. Reckon the river will come again. Aye, but we'll be ready. You nod. You know he is right. The river always comes again. That is its nature, and perhaps that is why you feel no anger toward it now. You have learned that survival is not about outrunning the flood. It is about learning how to stand when the waters recede. The fire snaps and hisses. Someone passes you a mug of weak ale. You take it, feeling the warmth seep into your hands. Around you, the voices of your neighbours rise and fall, weaving a tapestry of simple, stubborn life. You lift the mug in a quiet salute to the river that tested you, to the land that still holds you, to the fragile hope that has found its way back into your chest. Then you drink, and for the first time in many days, you feel truly alive. Outside the circle of firelight, the river slides past in the darkness. Watching, waiting, you do not fear it. You never will again. The night settles around you with a hush, as soft as a lullaby. The air holds a quiet promise that for this one stretch of darkness, you may rest without fear. You feel your body easing at last, every ache softened by the warmth of the hearth and the slow drift of your breath. In your mind's eye, you see the fields again, green and alive, rows of grain bending under a summer wind that smells of earth and sun. You see the river, no longer swollen with anger, but gliding past in its ancient course, as though nothing had ever disturbed its flow. And you see your neighbours, standing together in the light of dawn, faces lifted not in dread, but in quiet, defiant hope. Let yourself linger in that vision a little longer. Feel your heartbeat slow, feel your shoulders grow heavy with a peace you have earned. The river will rise again someday, but you will rise to meet it, as you always have, as you always will. Now, breathe deep. Let the last worries slip from your mind. You have done enough for today. You are safe here. You are part of something larger than any storm, something that endures. Close your eyes and rest. Sweet dreams, my dear, timeless community.